You've heard of places that whisper secrets, but have you ever heard the silence of a place that once held 1,000 silent screams? Welcome to Hallowell Asylum, where the walls still remember the children who were never meant to grow up. Built in the early 1900s, Hallowell was supposed to be a place of healing, but what it became was a prison for the broken, the lost, and the forgotten. The stories say it was a place where hope was buried deeper than the earth. You can still hear the echoes of the children who once roamed these halls. Some say the cries are still trapped in the walls, waiting for someone to listen. Others say the ghosts are still here, watching, waiting for the right moment to speak. And if you dare to walk through those doors, you might find yourself wondering, who were these children, and why do their stories still linger in the wind, like the last breath of a forgotten dream? So, what's your story, dear listener? Have you ever heard a whisper that didn't belong to the wind? You know, it all started in 1872, when a wealthy businessman named Elias Hallowell decided to build a place of healing, or so he claimed. But behind the grand stone facade, there was something far darker than medicine. The building itself was a marvel of Victorian architecture, with high ceilings and intricate woodwork. But the real marvel was the number of children who ended up there, not for their ailments, but for their behavior. The children came from all over. Some were runaways, some were taken by well-meaning parents who thought they needed treatment. But once inside, they never left the same. By the early 1900s, the asylum had grown so large that it housed over 200 children, many of whom were never seen again. And when the state took over in 1912, they called it the Children's Haven, but the truth was far more sinister. You remember the days when the world felt safe, and the air smelled like apple pie and fresh laundry. But somewhere in the 1940s, in the quiet town of Hallowell, the scent of something else started to linger like burnt sugar and damper. The staff began to notice things: children missing, beds left unmade, and a strange, low hum coming from the east wing. No one knew what to make of it, but the whispers started to spread like wildfire. Then came the screams, soft, distant, and wrong. They would come at night, not from the children, but from the walls. It was as though the building had learned to cry. The townspeople began to ask questions, but the staff would only smile and say, "We're just doing our job." And so, the silence grew thicker, like a blanket over a forgotten secret. It was only when the last child vanished that the truth began to unravel. But by then, no one was left to remember what had happened or what had been left behind. You remember the night the lights went out at Hallowell? The one where the children vanished without a sound, and the nurses never found a single trace of them. It was the 1930s, and the asylum was full, every room echoing with the cries of the lost. But that night, something changed. The air grew colder and the silence was louder than the screams. When the lights went out, the children didn't cry. They didn't run. They just stopped. And then they were gone, leaving behind only a trail of footprints in the dust, leading straight into the unknown. The nurses searched for hours, but nothing was found. No bodies, no clues, just a silence so heavy it pressed against the walls, as if the building itself had swallowed the children whole. Some say the children were taken by the asylum's ghosts. Others say they were never there at all. But one thing is certain. That night, something in Hallowell changed forever. I've heard from a few folks who claim they saw the children wandering the halls of Hallowell just before the asylum was shut down. They say they could hear them laughing, but when they turned around, there was no one there. One woman told me she was walking through the courtyard one night and saw a group of small figures playing in the grass. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, and their laughter echoed like it was coming from everywhere at once. Some say the children are the souls of those who died in the asylum, trapped between the world of the living and the dead, unable to move on without closure. There's something deeply unsettling about these stories, not just because they're about the dead, but because they feel real. Like someone, somewhere, is still waiting to be found. And that's what hauntings are, isn't it? Not just the ghosts, but the people who remember them, the ones who keep the stories alive, even when the world has moved on. We began with the records, you know, the old ledgers, the faded ink, the names that had been lost to time. Every child who vanished from Hallowell, every name that wasn't meant to be forgotten. The first thing we found was a pattern, not just in the dates, but in the way the names were written. Some crossed out, others were written, like the asylum had tried to erase them. Then we found photographs, not the ones you'd expect. These were old, grainy, and strange children in the same pose, same expression, as if they had been posed for a family portrait that had never been taken. Some of the photos had no names, no dates, just a series of faces that looked like they belonged to the same child, just different ages, as if time had looped back on itself. And then, the most unsettling thing of all, there were no records of any of these children ever leaving the asylum. Not one, just silence, and the feeling that they were still there. So we kept digging, and the deeper we went, the more we realized Hallowell wasn't just haunted, it was hiding something. Something that had been forgotten but never gone away. You see, the thing is, no one really knows what happened to those children. Not the exact moment, not the exact way. Just a silence, like the world forgot to breathe. The records are all there, but they're just empty spaces. No names, no dates, just a ledger page with a single line, children lost, never found. It's like the asylum swallowed them whole and never let them out. They say the walls still whisper, but what they whisper, no one's ever been able to hear. Just the sound of something waiting, like the children are still inside, but not in the way you'd expect. And the worst part? No one's ever dared to go back. Not since the last storm, when the lights went out and the wind howled like it was carrying something away. So you see, the real mystery isn't the children, it's the silence. The silence that's been left behind, and the silence that's still waiting to be broken. You've heard the rumors, haven't you? That the Hallowell Asylum isn't just haunted, it's cursed. That the children never left. That their laughter echoes through the halls like a ghostly lullaby. Some say the real tragedy wasn't the abuse or the neglect, it was the silence. That the children were never heard from, not even by the staff. That the caretakers didn't know they were gone until the building was empty. There's even a theory that the children weren't the only ones who vanished. That the staff, too, disappeared, either taken by the asylum's dark magic or simply lost to the silence that swallowed them whole. And then there are the ones who say the asylum never closed. That the building still stands, and the children are still there, waiting for someone to come looking, for someone brave enough to listen. You know, some mysteries don't just fade away, they linger like a cold wind in the hallway, whispering, we're still here. The Hallowell Asylum's secrets refuse to be buried. For decades, they've tried to piece together what happened to those lost children. But the truth seems to be hiding in plain sight, like a ghost in the attic you can't quite catch. There are no official records, no closure, just a lingering question that haunts the air like a lullaby from a long month past. What if the children never left? And so, the mystery remains a quiet, unresolved echo in the silence of the forgotten. A story that lingers, not because it's scary, but because it feels too real to be ignored. You know, sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the ones that scream, but the ones that whisper. And those whispers are still echoing through the Hallowell Asylum, just waiting for someone to listen. There's a comfort in knowing that even in the darkest corners of history, there's still a little mystery left to uncover. Maybe that's why we keep returning to these places, hoping for answers. But for now, let's take a deep breath and let the silence settle in. Sometimes, the best way to hear a story is to let it find you. And remember, my dear friends, the best stories are the ones that linger in your mind long after the last word is spoken. So stay with me, and let's hear the next one together. You've heard of the sea, but have you heard of the sea's secret? The SS Marine Midland vanished in 1945, and no one knows why. You ever wonder what happens to ships that just disappear? Built in 1938, the Marine Midland was a proud, sturdy vessel. But then, in the dead of night, it vanished without a sound. No distress calls, no survivors, just silence. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Some say the sea took it. Others whisper about a curse, or a storm no one saw. But the truth, no one's ever found a single piece of wreckage. Just a story that won't fade. So why do we keep coming back to the Marine Midland? Maybe because it's not just a ship, it's a question, a mystery, and sometimes the sea answers in the most eerie way possible. You know, the SS Marine Midland wasn't just any old ship, it was a real piece of history. Built in 1943 for the war effort, it carried soldiers, supplies, and even a few brave souls who never made it back. It was one of the last ships to leave the West Coast before the war ended, but something about that final voyage just didn't feel right. Some say it was cursed, others say it was just bad luck. The crew wasn't just a group of men in uniform. Some were veterans, others were young, fresh out of boot camp. And then there were the ones who had no idea they were about to disappear. The last radio transmission was a simple message, "We're all here." Then nothing. No distress call, no warning, just silence. And that silence has haunted the waters ever since. Some say the ship was never found. Others say it was pulled under by the sea itself, as if it had been waiting for something or someone to come along. You remember the calm before the storm, don't you? Those quiet, sunny days when everything seemed just right. Then came the first whispers, like a breeze carrying secrets from the sea. It started with a radio crackle, a single voice over static, reporting delays. Then, a strange silence. A ship that should have been in port was suddenly gone. They said it was a storm, but the storm never came. and the sea, which had always been so kind, now seemed watchful, like it was holding its breath. Even the locals started to whisper, "The sea doesn't forget," they said, "and neither does the ship." But no one believed it until the lights went out and the silence grew louder. You've heard the stories of the ship that never made it. The SS Marine Midland, bound for New York with over 200 souls aboard, vanished without a sound. No distress call, no wreckage, just silence where there should have been chaos. The last known radio transmission was a simple, eerie message, "All hands on deck." No response. Then, nothing. The crew was supposed to be preparing for a storm, but instead, they were preparing for something far worse. Survivors claimed they heard a sound like a groan from the ship's bones, followed by a sudden, violent lurch. Then, the ocean swallowed them whole. Some say it was a ghost ship, others a curse. But the truth, no one knows. The Coast Guard searched for days, finding only a single life raft with a single, unopened can of food. Inside, they found a note, written in trembling handwriting, "We're not in the storm. We're in the dark." The Marine Midland is gone, but its story lingers. A ghost ship, a haunted route, a warning in the deep. If you ever find yourself near that harbor, listen for the sound of a ship silent, waiting, and never returning. I remember the day we heard the first whispers of the Marine Midland. A sailor, old and grizzled, said he saw the ship in the fog, not moving, just floating, like it was waiting for someone. He said the ship wasn't real, but it wasn't a dream either. He swore he saw the outline of a figure on the bridge, just standing there, motionless, like it was waiting for something to happen. Some say the ship was a warning, a message from the past. Others believe it's a ghost, a soul that never found peace, still searching for the people it left behind. But no one can agree on what it means. Some say the ship is a trick of the light, a trick of the mind. Others say it's a sign, a call from the deep, a reminder that some things never truly disappear. The investigation began with a simple request to look into the disappearances of the SS Marine Midland. But what they found was more than just a missing ship. It was a ghost of the past, still whispering its secrets. They combed through old maritime records, and the first strange thing they found was a log entry from the captain, written in a shaky hand. It described a fog so thick it felt like the sea had swallowed the sky. One of the most unsettling discoveries was a sealed envelope found in the captain's quarters. Inside was a single phrase written in red ink, "We are not alone." The handwriting was unmistakably the captain's, but he had died years before the ship vanished. As the investigation deepened, they found more and more strange things, notes written in the crew's handwriting that had never been sent, maps with unmarked islands, and a single compass that always pointed the same way, even when no one was looking. And then there was the final discovery, a photograph of the ship, taken just days before it vanished, with the same strange light in the distance and a shadow moving behind it, like something watching, waiting. You see, there's one thing that's never made sense to anyone who's studied this case. No one knows why the ship's log was never recovered. It's like the sea swallowed it whole, along with the last words of the captain. Some say it was lost in the storm, others say it was hidden, but the truth is, no one has ever been able to find the log. It's as if the sea itself decided to keep its secrets. And that's the thing about the Marine Midland. It's not just the mystery of where it went. It's the mystery of what was left behind, what was never said, what was never written. Maybe the log was never meant to be found. Maybe it was never meant to be read. Maybe the sea took it and took the truth with it. That's what I think. That's what I've come to believe. You know, some folks say the ghost of the captain still sails these waters, his voice a whisper in the wind telling sailors to turn back. Have you ever wondered if the sea remembers its own? There's a local legend that the ship's last radio transmission was a word they never heard before, Nemesis. Some say it's a warning. Others say it's the name of a ghost ship that haunts these same waters. Some say the ship was never lost at sea, just hidden away by the government. You ever think about what secrets the military might still be keeping? Maybe this is one of them. And then there are the ones who say the ship never left the port at all, that it was secretly dismantled, its parts scattered, its history buried like a bad dream. But no matter what the stories say, one thing's certain: when the wind howls through the creaking piers, it sounds like a song only the lost can hear. You know, sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't solved by evidence, but by the silence that follows. The SS Marine Midland vanished like a whisper in the dark, leaving only questions and the echo of its name. We've searched the depths of the ocean, scoured every archive, and even spoken to the few who remember the day it left port. But no one can tell you where it went or why. Some say the ship was cursed, others that it was never meant to be found. Well, what if the truth is something even more unsettling? That the Marine Midland never left at all. So here we are, still waiting for answers, still chasing the ghost of a ship that never should have vanished. And maybe, just maybe, it's still out there somewhere, in the dark. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest whispers. Like the ocean, it doesn't shout, it hums, and we're all just listening. The SS Marine Midland vanished like the tide, leaving only echoes and the sound of waves that never quite stop. And so, we leave you with that hum, just a whisper, a question, and the promise that somewhere, someone is still listening. Stay warm, stay curious, and remember, some stories never truly end. You've heard of places that whisper, but Blackwater Castle? That's a place that hums. It's not just the wind, it's something deeper, something old, like the walls are remembering. Built in the 1600s by a man who thought he was invincible, the castle's history is littered with secrets. Some say the blood of a murdered wife still stains the hearth, and the walls remember every whisper. They say the castle is haunted by a woman who never left. Her voice is a low, echoing hum, a reminder that some places are too heavy to forget. You can almost hear her if you listen closely. Blackwater Castle is not just a place, it's a story that doesn't end. And if you're ever drawn to its whispering walls, remember, some stories are better left in the dark. You see, Blackwater Castle wasn't always a place of sorrow. It started as a fortress, a stronghold built by the O'Reillys in the 12th century. The stones were laid with a purpose, to guard the land and its people. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40-ounce tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The O'Reillys were noble, fierce, and proud. They ruled with a heavy hand, but also with a sense of honor. Their banners flew high, and their halls echoed with the sound of laughter and steel. But power breeds envy. The O'Reillys became targets of war, and the castle changed hands more than once. Each new ruler left their mark, some peaceful, others not so much. One story says a young woman named Ethan was the last to live in the castle before it fell to ruin. She was known for her beauty and her wit, but also for her defiance. The castle whispered her name long after she was gone. The castle was abandoned, its halls left to the wind and the memory of those who lived there. The stones still remember, and the whispers still echo through the halls, waiting for the right soul to listen. You remember how the wind used to whistle through the cracks in the stone, like a child trying to sing a lullaby. But now it sounds different, like someone is trying to say something, just not quite getting the words right. The servants started to notice the faintest hum in the hallways, as if the walls themselves were trying to speak. They would stop in their tracks, listening, and then shake their heads as if they'd heard something they weren't meant to. One morning, the butler found his teacup overturned, the tea still warm, as if someone had just sipped from it. He looked around, but the room was empty. He laughed it off, but the laugh felt too loud, too sudden. Then came the silence. Not the kind of silence that rests after a storm, but the kind that settles in your bones, like the world has forgotten how to breathe. And that's when the whispers began to grow louder. One stormy night, the storm howled like a banshee, and the wind screamed through the castle's ancient stones. The keepers heard it first, a low, keening sound, like a woman in distress, echoing from the east wing. They followed the sound, drawn by an irresistible pull, only to find the door to the east wing ajar, as if someone had been waiting for them to arrive. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp moss and something older, something forgotten. The lantern's flame sputtered and died, plunging a hallway into darkness. Then came the whispers, not from the walls, but from the air itself, as though the castle were breathing, remembering. The keepers tried to leave, but the door slammed shut behind them. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they could no longer tell if they were hearing voices or the castle itself speaking in a language long forgotten. No one ever found the keepers again. The castle was silent for a year, then the whispers returned, and the wind began to howl again, as if the castle had finally remembered what it had lost. I've spoken to dozens of people who claim to have heard the whispers in Blackwater Castle. One woman said she was there for a family reunion, and the voices were so clear she thought she was being watched. Another man, a retired journalist, said he recorded the whispers on his phone. He claims they were in a language he didn't recognize, like a whispering come from another time. Some say the whispers are the voices of the original builders, trapped in the stone. Others believe they're the souls of those who died in the castle's dark past, still seeking closure. But the most unsettling testimony came from a child who said the walls were alive. They described the castle as a place that remembered, and that it was waiting for someone to finally listen. We followed the trail of whispers through the castle's crumbling corridors, where dust motes danced in the slanting light, and every step seemed to echo with the weight of centuries. The investigators found a sealed diary from 1892, its pages brittle and yellowed, filled with frantic entries about a ghost that spoke in a voice like wind through broken glass. The air in that room was thick and cold, and the walls seemed to breathe, as if the castle itself was alive and remembering something it shouldn't. They found no bodies, no proof, just a silence that spoke louder than any scream, like the castle had chosen to forget, but not forgive. The investigation ended with more questions than answers, and the castle's whispers grew louder in the nights that followed. You've heard the whispers, felt the cold, and seen the shadows, but there's one thing that's never been explained. What if the castle itself is holding its breath, waiting for the right moment to speak? Every guidebook says the same thing. The castle was built in the 1500s, but no one can say for sure what was inside the sealed room beneath the east stairwell. It was never opened again after the last owner vanished. The local historian claims the room was sealed during a family feud, but even he can't say for sure why. Some say it's a curse, others say it's a tomb, and still, no one dares to go in. So here's the thing, we walked these halls, listened to the stories, and felt the cold. But the one detail that has never been explained, it's still waiting, and it's still whispering. Some say the walls of Blackwater Castle still remember the voices of those who live here. They whisper through the cracks, echoing the laughter of the past, like a ghostly radio tuning in on a dead channel. Old Mrs. Hallowell, who lived next door, used to say the castle was built on a grave. She swore the stones had been hauled from a battlefield where a king was killed, and the blood still clings to the stones like a curse. There's also the tale of the missing servant girl, Clara. She vanished in the 1800s, and the castle's servants say she's still there, trapped in the mirror room, waiting for someone to find her. Some say the castle is just a place with a lot of history, and that the stories are just stories. But then again, no one has ever seen the inside of Blackwater Castle since the last owner vanished in 1948. You've heard the whispers, but have you ever wondered if the castle is just waiting for someone brave enough to listen? Or if it's already listening to you? You might think the castle's secrets are buried, but some things just don't stay quiet. The whispers still echo through the stone, and the air feels heavier now than it did a century ago. There's a pattern to the whispers, always at dusk, always near the east wing. They start as a murmur, then swell into something almost like a lullaby, but with a cruel, lingering edge. No body was ever found, no evidence of a struggle. Just a locked door and the smell of burning cedar, like someone had tried to start a fire and left in a panic. The police say it was an accident, a faulty gas line. But the locals still tell stories of the family's last night, of a child's laughter, a mother's scream, and a door that never closed. And so the castle waits, a place where the past refuses to stay buried, where the whispers are just the beginning, and the truth is still waiting to be heard. You've heard the whispers in the stones, felt the cold in the air, and wondered if the past still lingers. But sometimes, the silence is the most unsettling sound of all. We often chase the ghosts, but maybe the real mystery is why they stay. Is it guilt, grief, or something far older than any of us? As the fire dims and the night deepens, remember that the walls may not just remember the past, they may still be listening. But before we move on, I'll leave you with this. Sometimes, the most haunting stories aren't the ones we tell, but the ones we never forget. You've heard of the old prisons that haunt the edges of town, but Hallowell, that place is more than a name, it's a whisper. You ever wonder what ghosts need to be remembered by? Built in the 1800s, Hallowell was meant to be a place of order, but the walls, thick and cold, were built to hold more than just prisoners. You think about the ones who never left and the ones who were never found. The stories say the prison was filled with more than just chains and silence. Some say the walls still remember the screams. Others say the echoes are the ones who never got to say goodbye. And now, it's a place of silence. But sometimes, when the wind whispers through the cracks, you can hear it just a little. A voice, maybe, or just the sound of something waiting. You know, the story of Hallowell Prison doesn't start with stone and chains, but with a man named Thomas Hallowell, who had a rather peculiar vision for a place of punishment. He wasn't the kind of man who built things for the glory of it, he built them to make a point. A point about discipline, order, and the cost of sin. Hallowell was a man of his time, and his time was one of great unrest. Crime was on the rise, and the public wanted justice no matter the cost. So he built Hallowell Prison as a symbol of that era's fears and frustrations, a place where the worst of humanity would be made to pay for their sins. But even in the best of intentions, there's always a price, and for Hallowell, that price was paid in blood, silence, and the ghosts that never left. You remember the way the air felt in that old cell block, thick and heavy, like it was holding its breath. The walls seemed to hum with something ancient, something that had been waiting for a long time. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The first real clue came when the janitor found a child's toy, half buried in the dust. A red ball, worn and cracked, with a single fingerprint on it like a message left behind. The guards began to notice things, shadows moving where there should be none, doors creaking open by themselves. But they laughed it off, said it was just the old building, just the way it was. And then, the first real disappearance. A young woman, no one knew where she went, just that she was gone. Her things were still there, untouched, like she'd vanished into the wall itself. The prison, it seemed, was trying to tell us something, not with words, but with silence. We were all too busy with our lives to listen. You know, sometimes the darkest secrets don't come from the worst crimes, but from the quietest silence. The Hallowell prison wasn't built for murder, it was built for silence. In 1957, a young woman named Clara Bell was sent there for a crime that didn't fit the punishment. She was accused of something she didn't do, and the system shut her away without a trial. Her last letter to her mother was found in the prison archives. It's brief, but the words are full of fear. She writes, "They don't let me out, and I don't know if I'm still alive." The prison was closed in 1972, but Clara's story never left. Her name faded from the records, her fate buried under the weight of silence. And now, the echoes of her voice can still be heard in the hollow walls. I remember the way the air would still, like the world held its breath when the doors opened. The sound of metal on stone, like a ghost walking through the halls, and the faint echo of a child's laughter that wasn't quite there. One woman swore she saw a figure in a white dress, walking the corridor, her hands clasped in front of her, never looking up. She said it was a prisoner who'd been executed years before, and she was still waiting for her family to come find her. There was even a nurse who claimed the spirits of the women would appear in the infirmary, their faces pale and drawn, whispering of pain and injustice. She said they never asked for anything, just to be heard. And then there was the woman who claimed to see a child's hand reaching through the bars of a cell, just before the door slammed shut. She said the child had been there all along, waiting for someone to let them out. These aren't just stories, my friends. They're echoes of a place that never truly let go. And if you're wondering, I don't believe in ghosts, but I do believe in the weight of memory. The first clue came in the form of a single, yellowed envelope sealed with a faded wax stamp. Inside, a list of names, some familiar, some not, each with a date and a location. It felt like someone had reached into the past and handed me a map to the forgotten. We began cross-referencing the names with old newspaper clippings and court records. It was like piecing together a puzzle from a broken mirror. Each fragment revealed more than we expected, and some pieces simply refused to fit. The deeper we dug, the more we found that the prison wasn't just a place of punishment, it was a place of secrets. People had been taken, not just locked up, and some of them never left. One name kept appearing in every record we found: Alina Whitmore, a woman who had vanished without a trace. Her last known address was the prison itself. The record stopped the day she disappeared. And that, I think, is where the real story began. You know, the thing that's always bugged me about Hallowell is that no one ever explained why the cell doors never locked. It's like the prison had a mind of its own, or maybe it was just waiting for someone to listen. Some say the guards just forgot to lock up, but that doesn't make sense. These were no ordinary prisoners, these were people who had done terrible things, and you don't let them out unless you're ready for what they might do. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? The ones that say the Hallowell prison isn't just a place, it's a memory, a mirror that doesn't reflect the living. Some say the prisoners never left, that the walls held them, not just in chains, but in their own minds, trapped by the fear that they would be found out. There are those who believe the prison was never meant to be built at all, that the ground itself was cursed and the stones were never meant to hold human flesh. And then there are the ones who say the real ghosts aren't the prisoners, they're the ones who tried to save them, who never got to say goodbye. So the next time you hear that whisper in the dark, remember this: the Hallowell prison didn't just take lives, it took stories, and it's still telling them. You know, sometimes the most haunting things aren't the ghosts, but the questions that never get answered. What if the real mystery isn't who they were, but who let them disappear? No one has been able to find the records, not even the historians who have spent decades chasing the truth. It's like they were erased from time itself. Some say the prison itself remembers, that the walls hold their whispers, their cries, and the weight of a truth that's never been told. And so, the story lives on, not in the headlines or the records, but in the silence between the lines, in the places where the light doesn't reach. You've heard the echoes of the Hallowell prison, but have you ever wondered what lies beyond the last whisper? What if the silence is just another voice waiting to be heard? The past is never truly gone, it just waits in the corners of our lives, ready to slip through the cracks of memory if we're not careful. So, as we turn the page, remember that every story has its silence, and every silence has its truth. Stay with me, dear listener, and let's see what the next tale has to say. You've heard of the Priory of Saint Foy, haven't you? a place where time seems to freeze and the silence is louder than any sound. It's in the heart of the French countryside, surrounded by fields that have watched over it for centuries. Some say the wind carries whispers from the past. They tell of voices that echo through the corridors, of footsteps that don't belong to anyone, and of a door that never stays closed. Some say the priory holds the memory of a tragic event, a secret that refuses to stay buried. Others say it's the place where the dead are waiting for someone to listen, and if you're brave enough to step inside, you might hear the silent screams of those who were never meant to be forgotten. You know, the priory of Saint Foy wasn't always a place of sorrow. It began as a humble shelter for pilgrims, a kind of rest stop on the road to Santiago de Compostela. But it was more than that, it was a place of power. Founded in the 12th century by a noblewoman named Alice de Montreal, the priory was meant to be a sanctuary for the poor and the weary. But Alice had a secret. She was a widow with a daughter, and her husband's murder had left her with a dark legacy. The priory grew in wealth and influence, but so did its secrets. Alice's daughter, Isabelle, was rumored to have inherited her mother's ruthless spirit and her taste for the forbidden. Isabelle's obsession with the occult led her to build a hidden chamber beneath the priory, where she conducted rituals that blurred the line between faith and fear. And it was there that the first whispers of the priory's dark past began. By the time the priory was declared a site of holy pilgrimage, its reputation had already begun to shift. Some called it a place of miracles, others a place where the dead still cried out for justice. And so, the priory became more than a place of worship, it became a place of legend, a place where the silence was louder than the screams and where the past never truly left. You remember how the air felt that first night, thick with the scent of damp earth and something older, something that clung to your skin like a memory you couldn't quite place. The wind had a voice, a low murmur that seemed to come from the trees themselves, as if they were whispering secrets only the earth could understand. Then came the sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers against the stone, like a heartbeat echoing from the walls themselves. It wasn't just the tapping. It was the way the air seemed to hold its breath, the way the light in the corridor dimmed just as the tapping stopped, leaving only silence. And then, just as you thought you had the situation under control, the tapping started again, but this time, it was coming from inside the wall. You ever wonder what happens when a place holds more than just memories? The priory of Saint Foy has kept its secrets for centuries, but one night, it let something out. In 1947, a young woman named Marguerite vanished without a trace. The last anyone saw of her was her scarf caught in the wind outside the priory's ancient gate. The priory never spoke of her, but the air around it has always felt different, like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. They found her scarf in the garden, tangled in ivy, and the air around it still smells of lavender and something else, something old and unspoken. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dub TIFF smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. To this day, the priory doesn't speak, but sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear the faintest whisper of a name, Marguerite, echoing through the stone. I've spoken to several people who say they heard the priory's silence before it ever became quiet. One woman, a retired teacher, claims she heard the echo of a child's laughter late at night, just before the power went out. She said it was a sound that made her pause, like the laughter was from someone she knew but couldn't place. She never told anyone, and the next morning, the lights were off, and the house was still. He ran, of course, but the figure never moved, just stood there, until the wind picked up and the garden was swallowed by silence once more. He never told anyone, and the next day, the priory was gone. These stories aren't just tales of fear, they're echoes of something real, something that still lingers, waiting for someone to listen. We began our investigation with a simple question: what happened to the last monks of Saint Foy? The records were sparse, but the silence was louder than any scream. The first clue was a faded map etched with strange symbols, drawn by a 17th century monk who claimed the priory had ears in the stones. One night, I found a hidden room beneath the chapel, its walls lined with ancient paintings of saints, but their eyes followed me like silent accusations. The final clue was a letter found in the pocket of a long-dead monk, written in a trembling hand. It spoke of a voice that never stops, but never speaks. And so, we left with more questions than answers, the priory whispering its secrets to the wind, waiting for the next curious soul to listen. You know, the thing that has never been explained is the absence of a body. No one has ever found the girl who vanished from the priory walls. Just the echo of her voice, the scent of lavender, and the shadow that never moves. They say she was the daughter of a noble family, taken in by the priory as a child. Her name has been lost to time, but her story lingers like a whisper in the wind. What happened to her? No one knows. The monks who lived there wrote about her in their journals, but their words were always vague. She was taken by the sorrow of the priory, they said. But sorrow? What sorrow? And for what? Some say the priory was cursed by a woman who died in childbirth, and her spirit is the one who took the girl. Others say it was a secret trial, a trial she never lived to see. But no one has ever seen the truth. And so, the priory stands silent, its walls holding the last memory of a girl whose fate remains a mystery. What happened to her? And why do we still hear her cry in the wind? You know, some folks say the priory's not just haunted, it's cursed. A local legend claims the nuns who once lived there vanished without a trace, and their screams are still heard in the wind, like a lullaby gone wrong. There are whispers that the last nun, Sister Genevieve, never left. Some say she's still in the chapel, her voice trapped in the stone, pleading for someone to free her from the silence. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered what if the silence wasn't just a lack of sound? What if it was the sound of something waiting to be heard? In the quiet moments, when the wind stops and the world holds its breath, you might hear it too, a whisper, not of words, but of longing. And it's not asking for anything, it's just waiting. So many years have passed, yet the questions remain. Who was the girl in the red dress? What happened to the monks who vanished in the night? And why does the priory still whisper even now to those who dare to listen? The official records say nothing. The local historian says nothing. The land itself, though, remembers. And it's not speaking in words, it's speaking in shadows, in silence, in the way the wind moves through the trees like a child's cry. The local priest says the place is cursed. The villagers say it's haunted, but I say it's just a place where people went to pray, and some of them never came back. And the silence they left behind is louder than any scream. Some say the priory is a museum of the past. Others say it's a graveyard of the forgotten. And still others say it's a prison for the ones who never escaped the dark. If you're listening, and you're still here, maybe you feel it too. That sense that something is watching, that something is waiting, and that the silence isn't empty, it's full of stories waiting to be heard. You ever notice how silence can be the loudest sound? Like the priory, it's not the screams you hear, but the absence of them that lingers. Sometimes the ghosts aren't there to scare you, they're just trying to tell you something you've forgotten. And if you ever find yourself walking through a forest at dusk, listen closely. Sometimes the trees whisper secrets only the brave dare to hear. Now, I think I'll go light a candle and let the story rest for a moment. But don't worry, there's more where that came from. Until next time, take care. And if you hear something, just remember, it might be calling your name. You've heard of the Dunwich Horror, haven't you? A tale that haunts the quiet corners of old New England, where the land itself seems to whisper secrets it shouldn't. This place isn't just a house, it's a memory. A place where the air feels heavy, and the silence isn't quite silence at all, but something else entirely. There's a story here, old as the stones beneath your feet. A story that's not just about monsters, but about the weight of history and the things that never quite leave. The Dunwich Horror isn't just a name, it's a feeling that lingers, a sound that echoes through the bones of the land, and a memory that won't fade no matter how hard you try to forget. So, what do you think? Is it a place, or is it something else? Something that waits, just beyond the edge of your understanding? You know, the Dunwich Horror isn't just a name, it's a legacy. Back in 1928, a farmer named Wilbur Farnsworth discovered something he shouldn't have. A creature, half man, half monstrous, lurking in the woods near Dunwich, Massachusetts. The locals whispered about it, called it the Dunwich Horror. They said it was a creature from the dark, born of old magic and ancient evil. No one knew where it came from, but it was real, felt in the bones of the earth. The horror wasn't just in the creature, it was in the silence that followed. The townspeople tried to bury the truth, but the legend grew. Now, it's part of the land itself, a dark memory that won't fade. And so, the Dunwich Horror became more than a story. It became a warning, a reminder that some things are best left undisturbed, that some places hold secrets, and some secrets are never meant to be spoken. But here's the thing, dear listener, what if the horror isn't just in the creature, but in the silence that follows? What if the true horror is the thing we never see, the thing we never speak of? That's the real Dunwich Horror, not the beast, but the fear that lingers in the air. The fear that some stories are never meant to end. You know how sometimes the wind seems to whisper things you don't quite understand? Well, that's exactly what happened in Dunwich. The air grew thick, and the trees started to groan like they were holding their breath. People began to say the earth was trembling beneath their feet, though no one could say for sure if it was the wind or something deeper. The silence was louder than the noise. Even the water in the well started to move on its own, swirling without wind or cause. It was as if the place was trying to tell us something, but we just didn't know how to listen. The town's elders would gather in the evenings, whispering about ancient texts and warnings they'd never shared before. They knew something was coming, but they didn't know what. And then, just before the horror began, the town's children stopped playing. They didn't run. They didn't laugh. They just stood still, staring into the distance as if waiting for something to arrive. You remember that night, don't you? The sky was low, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something old. The town was quiet, too quiet, like the world had held its breath. The Hallowell family had always been different. They lived on the edge of the woods, where the trees grow close and the silence is louder. People said they were cursed, but no one dared to say it out loud. They were never found. The town closed its doors and the woods grew quieter. Some say the wind still carries their voices, whispering through the branches. Others say it's just the trees remembering. And sometimes, in the dead of night, if you're still awake, you might hear it, a child's voice, calling for help, echoing through the woods. But by the time you get there, it's gone. Just the wind. Just the trees. I've spoken to more than a few locals who claim to have heard it sound like a woman weeping. But not quite. It comes from the woods, just beyond the old highway, and it's always at night. One man said he was driving home late one autumn evening when the sound hit him like a punch to the chest. He stopped the car, got out, and stood there for a long time, listening. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Another woman claimed she heard it while walking her dog near the edge of town. She said the sound was so loud she thought someone was nearby, but when she turned, there was no one. She said the sound was almost like a lullaby, but with a sorrow so deep it made her want to cry. She never told anyone, but she's still afraid to walk that path at night. These aren't just stories, my friends. They're echoes of something ancient and wounded, something that refuses to be forgotten. And if you're listening, I wonder, have you ever heard of it? Or do you think it's just the wind, or the trees, or something else entirely? We followed the trail of whispers to a crumbling barn at the edge of town, its boards creaking like a wounded thing. The air smelled of damp wood and something older, something that didn't belong to this world. Inside, the silence was so thick it could have been carved. Dust motes floated in the air like ghosts, and the floorboards groaned with every step. It was as if the place remembered every footfall, every breath. In the corner, we found a rusted iron box, its lid sealed with a symbol we'd seen in old folklore, something that whispered of forbidden knowledge. Inside, a single page of yellowed paper, faded but legible. The paper described a ritual, a calling, a summoning. It spoke of a thing that did not belong to this world, something that had walked among us in the form of a man, but had never truly been one. The final line was the most chilling. It still waits, in the places where the light doesn't reach, in the places where the world forgets to name the name. We left that night, the air heavy with the weight of something unseen. You know, the thing that haunts me most about the Dunwich horror isn't the creature or the ritual. It's the one detail that's just missing, like a puzzle piece that never arrived. No one ever explained where the creature came from. They all just assume it was summoned from the dark. But what if it wasn't? What if it was waiting for them? It was always there, waiting. In the woods, in the stone, in the silence. And when the ritual was complete, it didn't come. It just stayed. So the question remains, was it a mistake, or was it a warning? And if it was a warning, who was it meant for? That's the one detail they never explained. And maybe that's the scariest part of all. You've heard the stories, but some folks say the real horror is in the silence between them. They claim the wind carries whispers only the locals can hear, like a ghost trying to explain itself. Some say the town's founders were cursed by an ancient entity they tried to contain. Others believe the creature was never real, just a symbol of the town's dark past, a warning they ignored. The elders tell of a time when the town was full of life, but something changed. The river ran red, the sky turned black, and the people began to vanish. Now, they say, the river still sings a lullaby that no one can understand. You might think the stories are just tales to scare children, but some say the real horror is the way the town refuses to let go of its past. It clings to the memory like a shadow, and no one can shake it. So when you hear the wind howl through the trees, or feel a chill in the air, you might just be hearing the town's voice. A voice that says, we're still here. You know, sometimes the worst horrors aren't the ones that make noise. They're the ones that just stop. Like the Dunwich horror, which vanished without a sound, leaving only the silence where it once stood. The town tried to move on, but the air here still feels heavy, like something is watching, waiting for the right moment to return. It's not the howl of a beast, it's the whisper of a presence. Some say it's still here, hidden in the folds of the woods, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Others say it's gone, and that silence is the most terrifying thing of all. And so, the Dunwich horror remains neither monster nor man, neither memory nor myth. Just a whisper in the dark, waiting for the right person to listen. What do you think it is? And what do you think it wants? The answer, my dear, might not be in the dark but in the silence that follows. You know, sometimes the scariest things aren't the ones that scream, but the ones that whisper. And that whisper's still out there, somewhere. The Dunwich horror didn't just vanish, it left a silence so deep, it's hard to believe it ever existed. So, if you ever find yourself walking through a quiet town at dusk, listen closely. You might just hear it too. But don't worry, my dear, we've got more tales where this one came from. Just be sure to keep your doors locked. You've heard of the Chicago fire, but what about the Eastland? A ship that once floated on the lake, now a ghost in the water, whispering of a tragedy that swallowed more than just steel. It was the 1915, a time when the city was booming, and dreams were big until the ship tilted, and the world tilted with it. Now, decades later, the lake still remembers. Sailors say the water hums with sorrow, and the wind carries the echoes of those who never made it home. And in the quiet places where the water meets the shore, the wind sometimes carries a sound like a woman's scream, echoing from the depths of the Eastland. So, what do you think? Is it the wind, the water, or something that still lingers in the silence of the lake, waiting for the right moment to speak? So, let me tell you about the Eastland. It wasn't just any boat. It was the largest pleasure boat on the Chicago River, a floating palace with ballrooms and dance halls. People thought it was safe, until the night it wasn't. The Eastland was built by a man named William Spear, a businessman with a reputation for bold ideas and even bolder dreams. He saw the river as a highway, not just for goods, but for people, especially the working class, who wanted to enjoy life. The Eastland's design was revolutionary, but its construction was rushed. Steel was cut to corners, and the hull was too narrow for its size. It was a beauty, yes, but beauty can be deceptive. Still, the public loved it. It was a place where you could forget the grind of the city, where you could dance to a live band, sip champagne, and feel like you were part of something bigger than yourself. But the Eastland was more than just a boat, it was a symbol of progress, of hope, of the American dream. And for a while, it seemed like it would sail on forever. You remember the way the sky turned that deep, unnatural gray, like the world had forgotten how to breathe. The air grew heavy, and the wind carried a sound like 1,000 whispers, but not from the trees. The river, once a calm ribbon of life, began to churn. It didn't just move, it roiled, as if something beneath the surface had awakened and was reaching for the sky. A child, no older than 10, clutched her mother's hand, her voice trembling. "Mommy, the water's singing asterisk." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one dared to say they didn't believe her. Then, from the heart of the city, a siren wailed, not of warning, but of something far older, something that had waited, and now, it was waking. You see it now, don't you? The ship, grand and proud, slicing through the dark waters of the Chicago River, a steel titan, alive with the hum of industry, unaware of the fate that was already written. But then, the moment it slipped, just a flicker of something unnatural, a crack in the hull, a sound like a scream, and the ship tilted. No one saw it coming, but they felt it in their bones. No one could explain it. No one could save them. The ship was a tomb, and the water became a grave. And in the silence that followed, the screams didn't end. They say the river still remembers, that the water carries their voices, their fear, their final moments. And if you listen closely, you can hear them still in the dark, still screaming. Some survivors say they heard a woman's voice, high and frantic, echoing through the ship's steel bones. It wasn't a cry for help, it was a warning, like a ghost trying to reach the living. One man swore he saw a figure in the water, not drowning, but rising, arms outstretched like a child reaching for a parent who wasn't there. They all agree on one thing. The ship didn't just sink, it whispered as it went down, a sound like the wind through broken glass, or the voice of someone calling from the deep. No one knows what happened in that hold, but the stories keep coming, like the last echoes of a song the ship never finished singing. The investigators started with the old records, dusty and yellowed, but what they found wasn't just history, it was something else entirely. Some of the pages had strange smudges, like fingerprints or something more recent. They found a name, Asylum, Hallowell, linked to the Eastland. The records said she was a nurse who vanished during the disaster, but the files mentioned her in a way that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Like she wasn't just gone, but something else. One investigator claimed to hear a voice in the archive, a woman's voice, whispering in the dark. Not a recording, not a trick of the mind, it was real. And it wasn't saying anything, just waiting. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. They found a hidden room beneath the archive, sealed off for decades. Inside, they found a small, locked box with Alice M. Harlow's name on it, and when they opened it, they found something that made the silence louder than any scream. They never said what was in the box, but the silence after they left was louder than any sound. And the whispers didn't stop, they just changed. You know, the the thing that's bugged me for years isn't the fire or the bodies, it's that one scream. You ever heard a scream that just stops? Like it's cut off, like someone pulled the plug on a scream mid-chorus. They found the bodies, they found the wreckage, but that one scream, it's still out there, like a ghost in the machine. You ever think about how a scream can live on, even when the person who made it is gone? Maybe it was the last thing the ship's orchestra played. Maybe it was the cry of a child who never made it to the lifeboats. Maybe it was just the sound of the world breaking, but no one ever heard it. No one ever will. And that's the thing. The one detail that's never been explained. Not the fire, not the bodies, not the lives lost. Just that one scream. You ever wonder if some things are just meant to be forgotten? Or if they're just waiting for someone to listen? You ever wonder what happens to the voices that never fade? The Eastland screams, they're still here echoing in the wind, hiding in the dark. Some say they're not just echoes, they're warnings. The old-timers down by the river say the ship's still moored in the lake, waiting for the right moment to rise again. They say the water's too cold to be real, but too warm to be a trick. There's a theory, whispered in the back of bars and at the edge of campfires, that the ship wasn't just a disaster, it was a curse. That the souls inside never left, and that they're still waiting for someone to remember them. And then there's the one that makes even the bravest souls pause. They say if you walk the docks at midnight, you can hear it screaming, not in pain, but in a way that sounds like it's calling your name. So, what do you think? Are the screams just memory, or is there something still down there, waiting for the right moment to rise again? Even now, over a century later, the Eastland story refuses to fade. You can feel it in the silence of that lake, in the way the wind whispers through the trees, like it's trying to tell us something we're not ready to hear. Some say the voices are just the wind, but others swear they can hear the cries of the lost women, children, even men echoing through the steel and stone of that doomed ship. We've searched the archives, the ruins, the water itself, but the truth remains just out of reach, like the ghosts of those who perished in the night. Maybe the real mystery isn't who died, but who was left behind and why the world chose to forget their screams. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest echoes. The Eastland, it's not just a name, it's a whisper in the wind, a memory that won't let go. And you, dear listener, you're still here. You've listened to the screams, the stories, the silence that follows. But what if the real ghost isn't the ship, but the silence itself? There's a story waiting just beyond the next turn, a shadow in the hallway, a door that won't close. But for now, let's leave the Eastland behind and let the silence speak. Keep your ears open, my friend. The next tale is coming and it's not going to be quiet. You've heard of the Titanic, but have you heard of the Wilhelm Gustloff? It's not a ship you find in a history book unless it's the one that whispers in the dark. This wasn't just a ship, it was a floating city, packed with people fleeing war. And it was sunk in one of the deadliest maritime tragedies of the 20th century. Some say the sea remembers. Some say the souls of those who died still drift through the water, searching for answers, for closure, for a voice that will listen. And some say the Wilhelm Gustloff is not just a ship, it's a memory. A place where the past refuses to be buried. You know, the Wilhelm Gustloff wasn't just any ship, it was the largest passenger ship in the world when it set sail. Built in the 1930s, it was a floating palace for the wealthy, with grand ballrooms and plush cabins. But it was also a vessel of terrible fate, one that would soon become a symbol of a dark chapter in history. Its owners, the Hamburg-Sinkenberg Steamship Company, were proud of the ship's grandeur. But in the years leading up to the war, they knew it would be repurposed. The Nazis had plans for it, and those plans would change the course of history in a way that still echoes today. The Wilhelm Gustloff was more than a ship, it was a symbol of the Nazis' ambitions. It was meant to carry soldiers and supplies, but when war broke out, it was converted into a transport vessel for the Wehrmacht. But it was the civilians, refugees, women, children that would soon be the ones to suffer. And then came the orders. The Nazis had no choice but to use it for what it was built for. The Wilhelm Gustloff was going to be a floating prison, a place to move people from the east to the west. But what they didn't realize was how quickly it would become a graveyard. This was not a ship. This was a death sentence in disguise. The Wilhelm Gustloff was about to become the largest maritime tragedy in history. But the story doesn't end there. It only just begins. You know, sometimes the worst tragedies start with a simple mistake. A miscommunication, a wrong turn, or a moment of hesitation that changes everything. And that's exactly what happened on the Wilhelm Gustloff. The crew had been told they were heading to a safe port, but the fog was thick, and the radio was silent. No one expected the storm to come so soon, or the way it would swallow the ship whole. They tried to keep calm, but the sea was rising, and the ship was listing. Some said it was the weather, others whispered it was something else. Something that had been waiting, unseen, for this moment. And then, just as the lights went out, the silence fell. Not the silence of calm, but the silence of something watching. something that had been waiting for a long time to be heard. You've heard the names, but never the story. The Wilhelm Gustloff, what do you think of when you hear it? A ship? A war? A tragedy? No, my dear, it was all of those and none of them. It wasn't just a ship. It was a floating prison, a human cargo hold, packed with soldiers, women, children, people who had no choice but to board, no place else to go. And then came the storm. Not of wind or rain, but of chaos, of horror, of a single moment that would drown more souls than any flood in history. The final moments were not recorded. No film, no witness, no survivor. Just silence, and then the sound of the sea swallowing 1,000 lives in a single, terrible breath. To this day, some say you can still hear the voices beneath the waves, the cries of the lost, the echoes of a ship that never should have been built, and never should have sailed. I remember the look on her face, like she'd seen something no one should. Her eyes were wide, her hands trembling, and she whispered, "You won't believe what they did to those poor souls." She described the screams coming from below deck, the sound like a storm trapped in a bottle. It wasn't just crying, she said. It was like the ship was screaming with them. Some said they could hear voices in the waves long after the ship sank. They're still there, one man told me. They're waiting for someone to listen. One survivor claimed to see a figure in the water just before the ship went down. It wasn't a man, she said. It was something else, something hungry. The last testimony I heard was from a child too young to remember the war, but who said, "The sea doesn't forget. It just waits for the right time to tell the truth." The investigation began with a single yellowed envelope found in the attic of a retired captain's home. It contained a faded map and a name SS Wilhelm Gustloff marked in red ink. We followed the map to a forgotten pier on the Baltic coast, where the sea still remembers the weight of the lost. The air tasted like salt and sorrow. Underwater, the divers found more than just rusted metal. They found a child's shoe, a name tag with no name, and a single, unbroken chain like a promise to the sea. One diver claimed he saw a figure in the distance, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. He said it looked like a woman standing at the edge of the waves, holding a child's hand. The record said 9,000 souls were lost that day. But the sea remembers more than numbers. It remembers faces, voices, and the silence that follows a child's last cry. You know, there's one thing that's always stuck in my mind about the Wilhelm Gustloff, and it's not the bodies or the tragedy, it's the silence. The one detail that has never been explained, the one question that haunts me more than the screams of the lost. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Every account, every survivor, every historian, they all agree on the numbers. They all agree on the horror. But what they don't agree on is who exactly was on that ship that day. Some say it was just civilians. Others say it was soldiers. Some say it was both. But no one can tell you for sure. It's like the ship itself is guarding its secrets. The silence is louder than any scream. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right, you can swear you hear it whispering the names of the lost, but never telling you who they were. So I ask you, dear listener, what do you think? Was it just a ship? Or was it something more? A vessel that carried both the weight of history and the weight of the unknown? You ever wonder what happens to the stories we can't forget? Some say the Wilhelm Gustloff's ghosts still whisper in the Baltic fog, luring sailors and dreamers to the edge of the world. Locals swear they've seen a ghostly ship, black and vast, rising from the sea like a mirage. Some say it's not a ship at all, but the sorrow of a million souls still trapped in the water. One local even claims the Baltic has a way of keeping secrets, that the sea remembers, and that the ship's final moments are still playing out in the deep, just waiting for the right person to listen. So next time you hear the wind howl over the water, maybe it's not just the wind. Maybe it's a whisper from the past trying to tell us something we've forgotten. You've heard the names, but do you know the truth? The Wilhelm Gustloff, the deadliest ship in history, still haunts the Baltic, and no one knows why it vanished so suddenly. Some say it was a cover-up. Others whisper of hidden cargo. But the real mystery lies in the silence. No survivors, no wreckage, just a ship that vanished as if it had never existed. The world moved on, but the Wilhelm Gustloff never did. It's still out there, waiting like a ghost in the waves, and no one dares to look too closely. So what do you think? Was it a tragedy, a secret, or something far more sinister? The story isn't over, and neither is the ship. You've walked the edge of the sea with me, where history and silence meet. What do you think lingers beneath the waves, deeper than memory? The Wilhelm Gustloff was more than a ship, it was a graveyard of hope, and now, it's a whisper beneath the deep. What do you think the sea remembers? Sometimes, the past doesn't stay buried. It just waits for the right moment to rise again. What would you do if you heard the voices beneath the waves? We're not done yet. There are more stories waiting, more places where the past refuses to let go. And I'm still here, with the fire, with the stories, with you. Until next time, keep your ears open, your heart awake, and your story is safe. Good night. You ever heard of Grouse Mountain Resort? It's not just a ski lodge, it's a place that seems to hum with secrets. The kind of place where the wind whispers through the pines like it's trying to tell you something. Back in the 1970s, this place was a hub for the wealthy and the eccentric. But behind the luxury and the laughter, there were rumors of disappearances and strange happenings. People say the snow never melts where the tragedy happened. Now, decades later, the resort is quiet. The lights are dim, the laughter has faded, and the silence is heavy. You can almost hear the echoes of what happened there, lingering like the scent of old perfume in an empty room. And that's when the stories begin, the ones that say the mountain still holds its secrets, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to uncover them. You know, the Grouse Mountain Resort didn't start as a place of luxury. Back in the early 1900s, it was a logging camp, a place where men toiled in the woods, their lives as rough as the terrain. And then came the money. The owner, a man named Elias Grant, had a vision. He saw the trees, the land, and the potential. But he also saw the people, workers, families, dreamers. He promised them a place to call home, a place to rest after the hard work. Elias Grant was a man of vision, but also of secrets. Some say he had a hidden room beneath the resort, a place where he kept records, money, and other things. Others say he was just a man trying to survive the elements. And then came the first death, not of a worker, not of a visitor, but of someone who had been here before. A woman, a stranger, who had come looking for something she couldn't name, and she never left. The resort's history is like a song, one that has been passed down in whispers, in ballads, in stories told by those who still remember. But the song is incomplete, and the melody is still waiting to be sung. You remember the first time you heard the music, didn't you? A soft, mournful tune drifting through the trees, like a whisper from another time, carried on the wind like a secret. It wasn't just the music, it was the way the trees seemed to lean in, like they were listening, like they knew the song was a warning. Then came the footsteps. Light, hesitant, like a child's, but too precise, too deliberate, as if they were following a pattern no one else could see. You thought it was just the wind, or maybe the memory of a song you'd heard long ago. But you knew, deep down, that something had changed in the air, in the silence, in the way the trees stood still. That's when you started to wonder, had the song always been there, or had it just found you? You see it now, the first snowfall of the season dusting the old lodge like a veil. The lights are out, but the fire still glows faintly through the windows. It's quiet, too quiet, like the place is holding its breath. The snow's been falling for days, and the trail leads nowhere. You follow it, as if drawn by something unseen, and the silence grows heavier, like the air itself is holding its breath. The doors are locked, the lights are out, and the only sound is the echo of footsteps in an empty hall. You feel it, that strange pull, like the place is calling you in, but to what? You find the room, but there's no one there. Just the scent of pine and something older, something forgotten. And in the corner, a single, blood-stained rose still blooming, still waiting. I remember the way the fog clung to the trees like a ghost's breath, and the way the lights flickered on the mountain like a warning. One guest swore they saw a figure in the distance, just standing there, watching us. Another said they heard a voice, low and familiar, calling their name from the woods. It wasn't the wind, or the echoes of the night, it was something else entirely. Something that knew them. The staff at the time insisted it was just old wounds and bad memories, but the guests didn't believe that. They believed in the mountain, in the silence, and in the stories that came with the snow. And then there was the woman who said she saw a child playing in the snow, just before the lights went out. She didn't say if it was real or a dream, just that she never forgot the way the snow looked that night. We started with the basics, checking the blueprints, the old guest logs, and the first-hand accounts of the staff who stayed there. But what we found wasn't just strange, it was almost like the mountain itself had a memory. One of the first clues was a recurring pattern in the guest logs, dozens of entries mentioning a woman with a red scarf seen in the woods at dusk. No one could say for sure who she was, but they all agreed she wasn't supposed to be there. The deeper we dug, the more we realized the resort wasn't just haunted, it was a place where the past refused to stay buried. Every room, every tree, every shadow seemed to hold a story that wasn't ready to be told. And yet, for all the secrets it held, the mountain still had a way of being kind. It gave us warnings, it gave us clues, and it gave us a chance to listen to the stories, to the silence, and to the truth that was waiting to be heard. You know, the thing that still haunts me about Grouse Mountain is the one detail that just doesn't add up. No one can explain it, not even the locals. It's like the mountain itself is holding its breath. They say the ribbon was left by a guest who vanished in the 70s. But why a ribbon? Why red? And why did no one ever find it again after the storm that night? No one remembers the storm, but they all remember the ribbon. The police called it a tragic accident, a fall into the woods. But the ribbon was never found. And the mountain, it seems, doesn't forget. It just waits, in silence, for someone to ask the right question. So here's the thing, the ribbon still hangs there, and no one knows why. Maybe it's a message, maybe it's a warning, but I think it's just waiting. For someone to notice, for someone to wonder, for someone to listen. Some say the resort was built on a Native American burial ground, and the spirits of the ancestors still wander these halls. Others say the bloodstains are from a tragic love story that ended in murder. What do you think really happened here? Local historians insist the first guests died of mysterious illness, but the town's oldest residents say they heard screams at night and saw shadows moving in the woods. You ever wonder if the mountain itself is watching? Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dot smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Some say the bloodstains are just old rust from the pipes, but others insist they've seen the ghost of a woman in a red dress, weeping by the lake. Have you ever seen something that wasn't there at all? Even today, people claim to hear whispers from the mountain at night. Whether it's the wind, the trees, or something else no one can say for sure. But if you listen closely, you might just hear the past speaking. You've heard the ballads, you've seen the ghosts, but the truth, it's still buried in the snow. No one's ever found the body, and no one's ever said a word. They say the resort was built on a murder site, but no one can say for sure. Some say it was a ritual. Others say it was a love triangle gone wrong. The police closed the case years ago, but the locals still talk about the bloodstains. Some say they're still visible in the early morning light. If you're ever in the area, I'd suggest you take a look. But be careful, the mountain doesn't forget, and neither do the songs. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest whispers, like this old cabin where the trees don't rustle and the wind doesn't howl, it just holds its breath. And sometimes the stories don't end when the lights go out. They linger in the dust, in the shadows, in the silence between the heartbeats. But if you're not sure what to do, just keep walking. The stories are waiting for you, somewhere ahead. And remember, sometimes the best stories are the ones that don't have an ending, just a pause and a whisper in the dark. You've heard of the Bermuda Triangle, but what about the waters off the coast of Maine? This is where the SS Marine Midland vanished, never to be seen again. You ever wonder what happens when a ship just disappears? Built in 1937, the Marine Midland was a sturdy merchant ship, but it had a reputation for being a bit stubborn. Some say it had a strange habit of refusing to follow orders. You ever think about how a ship could just decide to stop listening? The last official report came in the early hours of November 13, 1956. The ship was en route from New York to Montreal with a full cargo of coal. Then nothing. No distress call. No wreckage. Just a sudden, eerie silence in the middle of the Atlantic. Some say the crew was cursed. Others believe the ship was lured by something in the deep. But the real question is, what could possibly make a ship vanish like that, without a trace? You ever think about what's out there, waiting in the dark? And now, decades later, the story still haunts the coastlines of Maine. Locals say you can still hear the echo of the ship's whistle on the wind. You ever wonder if the silence was really the end, or just the beginning? You know, the SS Marine Midland wasn't just any old ship, it was a workhorse of the Atlantic, built in 1943 for the U.S. Navy. It carried cargo, troops, and dreams across the ocean, but it was also built for one thing: to survive the harshest seas. It was part of the Victory Ship Fleet, a series of fast, sturdy vessels designed to keep up with the war effort. The Marine Midland was one of the last ones built, and it had a reputation for being tougher than most until that one fateful night. The ship's captain, James C. McLaughlin, was a man of steady nerves and sharp eyes. He had led many voyages, but this one was different. The logs say the weather turned sudden, the waves rose, and the crew was caught in a storm they couldn't outrun. What happened next is still a mystery to this day. Some say the ship vanished in a storm, others say it was attacked, and some believe it was swallowed by the sea without a trace. But one thing is certain, the Marine Midland was never the same after that night. You remember the day the sky turned a strange shade of green, like the sea had spilled into the clouds. It was a Tuesday, and the air felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. The crew of the SS Marine Midland noticed at first a faint shimmer on the surface, like the reflection of something they weren't meant to see. They said it looked like the ocean was watching them. Then came the whispers, not from the crew, but from the sea itself. They said the water had a voice, a deep, resonant hum that only the most attuned could hear. Some claimed it was a warning. The last time anyone saw the ship, The sky was dark and the sea was still. The radio crackled with static, and then silence. No distress call, no beacon, just the sound of the waves and the feeling that something had already left. You've been following the tale of the SS Marine Midland, haven't you? That ship, lost in the fog of the early 1900s, sailed into the unknown with a crew of men and a cargo of hope. But then silence. No distress call, no survivors, just the sea, waiting. The last known message was a simple one: we are all well. Then nothing. No logs, no bodies, just a ghost ship drifting through time, caught in the grip of the sea's cruel silence. It's like the ocean swallowed the truth whole. The crew never made it to port. No one ever saw the ship again. And yet, in the quiet hours of the night, some say you can still hear the faint sound of a ship's bell, echoing through the fog, calling for help. The SS Marine Midland is more than a ship. It's a question without an answer, a story that refuses to be told. And if you're listening, maybe you've already heard it. I still remember the way the ocean looked that day, flat, glassy, like it was holding its breath. One moment, a ship was there, and the next, it wasn't. The last survivor, a sailor named Bill, said he saw the ship lift off like a dream. He swore he heard the captain shouting, but no one could hear him over the wind. Some say the ship was never meant to be found. Others say the crew was taken by something that lives in the deep, something that doesn't like being seen. And then there's the radio transmission, still on the record. It's just a whisper, a voice saying, "We're not lost, we're here." I wonder, did they vanish, or were they just waiting for someone to listen? The investigators started with the logs, but the records were as thin as the fog over the bay. They found no one missing, no distress calls, just a ship that vanished like it had never been there. They dug into the crew's names, but the records were gone. No family members could be reached. No graves were marked. It was like the ship had been erased from history. Then they found the first clue, a single life jacket, washed up on the shore with the name Midland still faintly etched on the fabric. It had been there for decades, waiting to be found. The investigators started asking questions, but the locals would only whisper about the fog, the silence, and the way the sea seemed to remember the ship better than anyone else. Some said the ship didn't vanish, it was taken. Others claimed the crew never left, but no one could say for sure. And that's what made the story so strange, so hard to believe. You know, there's one thing that's always bugged me about the Marine Midland. Not the ship itself, but the one detail that's never been explained. What happened to the lifeboat? It was found, but not where it should have been. They found it on the beach, but it was upside down, like someone had tried to hide it, or maybe it just fell. But why? The logs say it was launched, but not where. It's like the ship tried to tell us something, and we just didn't listen. They say the sea takes what it wants. But the Marine Midland, it was more than just a ship. It was a story, a mystery, and maybe a warning. And that lifeboat? It's still waiting for someone to ask the right question. So here's the thing, dear listener, what if the truth isn't in the wreckage? What if it's in the silence between the waves? Maybe the Marine Midland didn't vanish, it just stopped listening. You've heard the stories, but what about the people who still tell them? Some say the ship's ghost still lingers in the fog, watching the coastlines of New England. Old mariners claim the ship was never found, but the stories don't end there. Some say the Midland's last voyage was a secret mission, and the crew was never meant to return. Some locals believe the ship's fate was sealed the moment it left port. Others think the crew was lost to a different kind of storm, one that doesn't break waves, but breaks hearts. The truth may never come out, but the stories keep going. Maybe that's the real mystery. Why do we keep searching for answers, even when the sea won't speak? Even now, decades later, the story of the SS Marine Midland still lingers in the quiet corners of the maritime world. You've heard the whispers, but have you ever wondered what really happened to the crew that vanished without a trace? No bodies were ever found, no wreckage, just a last radio transmission that cut off mid-sentence, like the ship was plucked from the sea by an unseen hand. The Coast Guard searched for weeks, but the sea swallowed their efforts whole. And to this day, no one can say for sure if this ship was lost to storm, sabotage, or something far more sinister. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Def smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You might think the mystery is solved, but I think it's just waiting like the ship itself for the right person to listen, to look, to feel the weight of what was lost. You ever notice how the sea has a way of keeping secrets? It whispers to the wind, it hums to the waves, and sometimes it just vanishes. Like the SS Marine Midland. What do you suppose it's hiding down there? You think the ocean's the only one with stories to tell? Maybe it's not the ship that's lost, but the people who sailed her. Did they ever find their way back? Or did they just fade like the tide? I don't know what the SS Marine Midland wants. Maybe it just wants to be remembered. Maybe it wants to be found. Or maybe it's waiting for someone to ask the right question. Have you ever wondered what that question might be? And so, we return to the sea, to the stories it tells in the dark. But before we move on, what if the next tale is just a whisper from the same place? What if it's not the end of the story, but the beginning of another? You've heard the whispers of the Priory of Saint Foy, haven't you? A place where the stones seem to remember the sins of the past, and the wind carries secrets that time can't erase. It was built in the 12th century, a place of prayer and power, but the monks who lived there were anything but peaceful. Rumors say they buried their dead in the walls, and the air still smells of something old and wrong. The locals say the air here is thick with sorrow. You can feel it in your bones, a quiet dread that lingers like the scent of damp earth and old blood. Some say the priory was the site of a terrible massacre. Others say it's a place where the dead still walk, and the living are not welcome. But one thing is certain, the silence here is not natural. And now, you're here. You stepped into the legacy of Saint Foy, a place where the past refuses to stay buried and the stories it tells are far from finished. You ever wonder how a place becomes a legend? Well, the Priory of Saint Foy started with a simple vow, a promise made in the 12th century by a French knight named Bertrand de Montrouel. He swore to build a sanctuary for the poor and the sick, but he also made a pact with the devil. Bertrand was a man of wealth and influence, but he was also a man of ambition. He built the priory with stone and hope, but he didn't realize the pact he made would cost more than just his soul. The devil, you see, is never one to forget a deal. The knights of the priory were not just warriors, they were also enforcers of the church's will. They punished those who questioned the priests, and those who questioned the priests were often found missing, or worse, found in the priory's shadowy crypt, never to be seen again. By the time the Reformation came, the priory was more than a place of worship, it was a symbol of power, corruption, and fear. The last abbot was accused of witchcraft, and the priory was burned to the ground, leaving only whispers and the promise of something still waiting beneath the rubble. And so, the Priory of Saint Foy became a legend, passed down through generations like a story too dark to be forgotten. But the question remains, was it ever real, or was it always just a tale told by those who feared the dark? You remember the first time you noticed something was off. It was a quiet morning, the kind where the world holds its breath, and the air felt heady with an unspoken truth. You looked up from your book and saw the window, and the light was wrong. The priest said it was just the changing of the seasons, but you knew better. You could feel it in your bones, a chill that didn't come from the wind. It was the kind of chill that lingers, like a memory you can't quite remember. You started seeing things, shadows that moved when no one was there, whispers in the silence between your thoughts. It was subtle, like a song you had no words for, but you knew it was calling to you. One night, you heard a sound like a child's laughter, but too high, too sharp. You turned, but there was no one there. Just the cold, the silence, and the feeling that you were being watched, not by eyes, but by something far older. You tried to convince yourself it was just your mind playing tricks. But deep down, you knew the truth. Something had been waiting, and it had finally found you. You remember how the air grew heavier, the silence more oppressive. It was then that the priest vanished, mid-prayer in the heart of the chapel with the scent of incense still clinging to his robes. The last witness said he saw the priest's hands trembling, then a flicker of unnatural light behind the altar, like a flame without fire, before he simply disappeared. The villagers whispered that the priest had been possessed, that the priory had always been a place where the living and the dead shared the same breath. But the real mystery is this: the priest's body was never found, and the altar where he vanished has never been touched since, as if the place itself refuses to let him rest. So, dear listener, do you think the priest was taken by the priory, or did the priory take him? And what does it mean that the place still waits, for him or for us? I met a woman in Vermont who said she saw the priory's ghost on a foggy October night. She told me it was a woman in a dark habit, standing at the edge of the woods, watching the road. She said the ghost didn't move, just stood there, staring down the road like it was waiting for someone. She tried to drive away, but her car wouldn't start. She said it was like the priory itself had reached out to stop her. She said the ghost looked exactly like the prioress who vanished in 1638. Some say she was burned at the stake, others say she was buried in the chapel. But no one knows what became of her, and no one ever has. One man said he heard her whispering from the walls of his home. He wasn't sure if it was a dream or a memory, but he said it was the voice of a woman, calling his name in the dark and never letting him sleep. Some say the priory's ghosts are just the echoes of those who were wronged, trapped between worlds. Others say they are the voices of the living, remembering the past and trying to warn us about the future. We followed the trail of whispers through the archives, and what we found was more than we expected. A ledger from 1723, filled with names, dates, and a chilling pattern that didn't match the records of the time. Names of servants, nuns, and a few young girls who vanished without a trace. The dates matched the disappearances of those who had been reported missing years earlier, but the records had been altered, erased, or just never written. The portraits were not just of women, but of women who had died in the same way by suffocation, their bodies found in their beds, eyes open, as though they had been staring at something unseen. The final clue was a single note, written in a trembling hand tucked beneath a loose floorboard. It read, "The blood of the old ones still runs through these walls." We didn't know what it meant, but we knew we were no longer just searching for ghosts. And as we left that room, the air grew colder and the silence felt like a presence, waiting for us to step back into the light of the world above. You ever notice how some things just refuse to die? Like the whispers in the wind, or the way the stones here seem to remember what they've seen. There's one detail about the priory that no one can agree on, not even the historians. It's like a missing piece in a puzzle that's been lost for centuries. It's not just the story of the priory, it's the story of what happened when a place tried to hold on to the past, and the past wouldn't let go. So, what do you think? Was it a curse, a cover-up, or just a secret that's been waiting for the right person to ask the right question? You know, some say the priory's curse isn't just in the stones, it's in the blood. Local legends claim that the last abbess, Sister Agnes, cursed her own descendants with a terrible fate, binding their souls to the land like a dark heirloom. They whisper that the curse took the form of a broken promise. Agnes vowed to protect the land, but in her desperation, she betrayed it. The land, in return, took her legacy and made it a prison. Some locals claim that the curse is still active when the wind blows just right. You can hear the echo of Agnes's voice pleading for mercy. But the wind never stops, and neither does the silence. And then there are the more modern theories. Some say the priory was built on an ancient pagan site, and the curse is the land itself, remembering its old gods and their angry spirits. But no matter the theory, the one thing everyone agrees on is this: the priory doesn't just haunt the living, it haunts the imagination. And that's the worst kind of curse. The final clue was found in the sealed envelope, buried with the last priest. It's been decades since anyone has dared to open it, and even now, the silence is louder than any explanation. Inside, a single sentence: the truth lies where the light cannot reach. It's poetic, but also cruel. We've searched every shadow, every corner of this place, and still nothing. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The last priest, Father Leon, vanished without a trace. He was the one who spoke of the curse, the one who warned us to leave the past buried. Now, we're left with only his silence. So we wait. We'll listen. And we wonder, what if the truth isn't meant to be found? What if the silence is the final answer? You know, sometimes the ghosts don't need to shout to be heard. They just sit in the silence, waiting for someone to listen. The priory may be gone, but the echoes of its past linger like the scent of old parchment in a forgotten library. And sometimes, the most haunting stories are the ones we never finish, left to drift like a whisper in the wind. So, I'll leave you with this: the past is never truly gone, it just waits for the right moment to find you. And now, if you'll excuse me, I think I hear something in the distance. You ever feel like some places just hold their breath? The Priory of St. Foy is one of those. It's not just a ruin, it's a living memory, whispering in the wind, waiting for you to listen. Built in the 12th century, it was a place of piety and power. But rumors say it was also a place of secrets. Some say they still echo in the stones. Some say they're still trapped in the blood. There are stories of nuns who vanished in the night, of voices calling from the crypt, of a ghostly figure in white who haunts the chapel. And then there's the blood. Some say it's still there, still waiting. But the most chilling part? The priory isn't just haunted, it's cursed. And if you're not careful, you might not leave the same way you came. You've heard the names, but now let's talk about the people who made this place what it is. The Priory of St. Foy was founded in the 12th century, when a group of monks came to this land with dreams of peace and devotion. The monks were led by a man named Brother Guillaume, a scholar with a heart full of fire and a mind full of questions. He believed the land was chosen by God, and so he built a stone chapel where the first prayers were said. And then there was the abbess, a woman of quiet strength and sharp eyes. She ruled with a hand that could be both gentle and firm, and her presence was felt in every corner of the priory. But even in the best of times, the priory had its share of secrets. Some were whispered in the dark, others were buried in the earth, and a few still linger, waiting to be uncovered. You know how sometimes the first thing you notice isn't the ghost, but the way the air feels different? Like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. At the Priory, the first sign was the scent like burnt sage and something sweet and sour, like a memory you can't quite place. Then came the whispers. Not loud, not clear, but a sound you could feel in your bones, like the walls were murmuring secrets to the floorboards. You might not have noticed it at first, but your hand would start to tremble when you reached for the doorknob, as if the handle itself was alive. And then, you look up, and see it just for a second, a flicker of movement in the corner of your eye, like a shadow that wasn't there before. You've heard the whispers of the Priory, but now you're standing at the edge of something far darker. This silence here isn't just absence of sound, it's a presence, heavy as the stone beneath your feet. One night, in the year of our Lord 1348, a young novice named Isabel vanished without a trace. The monks claimed she had gone mad, but the truth is far more sinister. The monks found her robe, torn and blood-stained, with no body to account for the life she once lived. Some say she was taken by the plague itself, others that she was never truly there to begin with. The last entry in the monastery's records is a single line: Isabel vanished and the plague did not come. But the truth, like the Priory itself, has long been buried. And now, centuries later, the Priory still watches, still waits, and still whispers her name in the dark. I met a woman who claimed the Priory still breathes. She said she walked the cloisters at midnight, and the stones whispered her name in Latin. She swore the windows wept, and the scent of incense lingered even after she left. The nuns, she said, didn't die in the fire, they were taken by something older than the stone. Another witness claimed to see a figure in a habit standing at the entrance, watching. She never moved, never spoke, just stared until the light faded and the silence returned. These aren't just stories. They're echoes carried through time. And if you listen closely, you might just hear the Priory speaking back. We followed the trail of whispers through the damp, moss-covered stones of the Priory's old foundations. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, as if the ground itself remembered what had been buried here. The first clue was a faded parchment hidden in the hollow of a broken column, maps of the Priory's layout, drawn in a careful, feminine hand, with notes about secret passages and rooms that never close. We found old chapel, its stained glass shattered, but the altar still stood, carved with symbols that had no name. The silence there was so deep, it felt like the walls were holding their breath. One of the investigators claimed to hear a faint, repeating melody from the choir, a tune from the 14th century, the same year the Priory was said to have burned. No one else could hear it, but the sound stayed with us. The final clue was a locket found beneath a floorboard with a name etched on the inside, Isabel, the same name that had been carved into the altar, the walls, and the very stones of the Priory. You know, there's one thing about the Priory that's never been explained. No one knows where the original bell was taken. It was there when the monks arrived, and it was there when the last one left. Some say it was stolen by the French revolutionaries, others say it was taken by the monks themselves. But no one has ever found a trace of it. Just a hollow space where it once hung. The bell's absence has left a silence that lingers like a ghost. You can still hear it in the wind, or in the creak of the stone, but no one has ever seen it, and no one has ever found it. So the question remains, what became of the bell? And why does it haunt the Priory so fiercely, even when no one can find it? Some say the Priory's curse is tied to the bones of the monks who once prayed there. Others claim it's the restless spirits of the women who were buried alive in the crypt. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered what the locals truly believe? A few years back, a group of amateur historians tried to dig up the truth. They found nothing but a rusted iron key and a journal that read like a fairy tale full of whispers, warnings, and a name you won't forget. Theories swirl like the mist that clings to the Priory's stone walls. Some claim the monks were killed by a plague, others by betrayal. Whatever the truth, one thing remains clear: the Priory has never been silent. And so, the story lives on, not just in books or whispers, but in the hearts of those who still visit, seeking answers or just a little bit of truth. You know, sometimes the most haunting things aren't the ghosts, but the questions that remain unanswered. And in the case of Saint Foy, there are more than a few. Who was the woman in the red dress? Was she a victim or a warning? The police closed the case, but not the mystery. They said it was a tragic accident, but the locals here don't buy that. We've seen the signs, and we've heard the whispers, and we're not the only ones. And then there's the girl who never left. The one who was found in the woods, wrapped in a red dress. No name, no family, no answers. Just a child, lost in the silence of the Priory's legacy. We've waited decades for a truth that never came. And maybe, in the end, that's the most terrifying part. That some stories don't end. They just linger. You might think the Priory's story is over, but sometimes the past has a way of slipping through the cracks. Did you ever notice how silence can be the most telling sound? The wind carries whispers that only those who have listened closely can hear, and sometimes, those whispers are not from the wind at all. Maybe the real mystery isn't the ghosts but the silence that follows them, and the questions that remain unanswered. So, as we turn the page, remember this: some stories don't end, they linger, and they wait for the next listener to come closer. You've heard of the Chicago fire, but what about the Eastland? It wasn't a fire, it was a ship that sank in the middle of Lake Michigan, and it left a silence that still echoes today. It was the 1915, and the Eastland was a grand, luxury steamship until it tilted suddenly, listing to one side like a drunken dancer, and then it just fell. They say the Eastland doesn't rest. It's not just the water that's haunted, it's the sky, the wind, the way the light catches the waves at just the right angle to make you feel like you're being watched. If you ever find yourself on the lake, and the wind picks up just right, and the water shimmers in a way that feels wrong, you might hear it too. A sound that doesn't belong to this world. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. It's not a scream you can see, it's a scream you can feel. And if you listen closely, you might hear it too. But be careful, dear listener. Some silences are not meant to be broken. You know, the Eastland wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol of Chicago's ambition. Built in 1915, it was the largest ship in the world at the time, a floating palace that brought the city to the shores of the Great Lakes. But beneath that shine was a story of hubris. The Eastland was built for luxury, with lavish cabins, grand dining rooms, and even a rooftop deck. It was meant to be a showpiece, not just a vessel. But the real tragedy started with a simple mistake. On the night of the disaster, the Eastland was supposed to be in dry dock for maintenance. Instead, it was launched into the lake with a faulty bow, a design flaw that would prove fatal. And that's when the horror began. The Eastland was a ship that never should have been afloat. A mistake in design, a miscalculation in loading, and a lack of safety measures all came together in a moment that would change history forever. So, what do you think? Was the Eastland doomed from the start? Or was it just a victim of its own success? Sometimes, the biggest ships are the ones that sink the hardest. You can almost hear the city's heartbeat as the Eastland starts to move. But something feels off, like the ship is holding its breath. There's a quiet tension, a hush over the crowd that's not quite right. Then it happens, a sudden lurch, like the ship is being pulled under by an unseen hand. People scream, but not in the way you'd expect. It's a sound that comes from deep inside, like the ship itself is crying out. The air grows colder, and the water seems to pulse with a life of its own. It's not just the ship that's in trouble, it's the river, the city, the very sky above that feels like it's holding its breath. You can feel it in your bones now, something is wrong, and it's not just the ship. The silence that follows the screams is deeper than any sound, and it's not the silence of peace. It's the silence of something waiting. You see it now, that moment frozen in time, the Eastland, a grander ship than it looked, swaying like a child's toy in a storm, its lights blinking like a warning. And then, the first scream, not from the water, but from the deck, a sound that never reached the shore, only the silence that followed. Some say they heard the ship groan like a beast in pain, others say they saw the water rise before the ship did, but none remember what came next. The silence that followed was louder than any scream, the kind that lingers in the bones, in the memory of those who lived to tell the tale. And so, the Eastland became more than a ship. It became a story, a warning, a place where the silence speaks louder than any sound. Some survivors say they heard a woman's voice, calling out from the water, echoing through the chaos like a ghost caught between two worlds. Others swear they saw a figure in the water, not moving, just floating, as if time had frozen around it, but holding his breath like a broken doll. A nurse who was on board later recalled a woman in the lifeboat, her face pale and drawn, whispering, "I can't go back." The last thing many heard was the sound of a child's laughter, distant and muffled, before the silence swallowed everything. And still, some say they hear it at night, a faint, broken cry, not from the shore, but from the water, calling for help. The investigators came with clipboards and cameras, but what they found was something they couldn't quite put into words. The air felt heavy, like it had been holding its breath for decades. They found old documents in a rusted lockbox, yellowed and brittle, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Names, dates, and a chilling note. No one ever heard them scream. They found a sealed room, untouched by time. Inside, a small desk with a single chair. The chair was always occupied, even when no one was there. And then there was the smell, something metallic, something sweet, something that made even the bravest investigators pause, as if the past was breathing through the walls. They took samples, they interviewed the locals, and they asked questions. But the answers were never the same. The past, it seemed, had a will of its own. The investigation ended, but the questions didn't. And sometimes, in the quietest moments, the silence would break and you could almost hear the screams. You know, the thing that haunts me most about the Eastland isn't the fire, or the sinking, or even the bodies. It's the silence. The silence that followed. No one heard the screams. No one heard the cries. Just the sound of the city, the clatter of the train, and then nothing. Like the world had swallowed them whole. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the absence of a story. A story that should have been told, that should have been remembered, but was swallowed by the fire, the water, and the silence. And that, my dear, is the one detail that has never been explained. Not the fire, not the sinking, not the bodies. Just the silence. The silence that followed. The silence that still lingers. You've heard the tales of the Eastland, but what about the whispers that still drift through the alleyways of Chicago? Some say the old ship still hums in the harbor, a ghostly lullaby for the lost. Others claim that the ghosts of the victims still gather in the old docks, their voices a chorus of sorrow that no one can quite catch, only feel. There's a theory that the ship didn't sink, it just folded in on itself, trapping the souls inside like a tragic, silent opera. And then there's the most unsettling one. The Eastland doesn't just haunt the water, it haunts the people who knew it, still pulling them back into its depths. Even now, the Eastland's ghost lingers in the silence between the sirens, waiting for someone to listen. Did they really sink that ship? Or did they just disappear into the fog? The search parties never found the bodies, and the survivors never spoke of the screams. Was it the water, or was it something else pulling them under? The city built a memorial, but the truth remains buried. Was it a tragedy, or was it a cover-up? And if the ship was never found, where did the bodies go? Sometimes, the dead don't need a grave. They just need someone to remember. And maybe, someone to listen. You know, sometimes the loudest silence is the one that holds the truth. The Eastland isn't just a story, it's a whisper in the wind, a shadow on the water, a question without an answer. And as we move on, I wonder what other stories are waiting in the quiet corners of our world. What echoes of the past are still trying to be heard? Stay with me, dear friends. The next tale is not one of silence, it's one of screams that never quite fade. We'll meet again soon with another story that lingers in the dark. Until then, stay warm, stay curious, and never let the silence go unanswered. You've heard the names of the haunted, the cursed, the forgotten, but the SS Marine Midland? That one's got a story that whispers through the fog. It's not just a ship, it's a ghost in the waves. Built in 1944, the Marine Midland was a proud vessel, a symbol of American might. But when it vanished in 1945, it took more than just steel and wood, it took a piece of history. Some say the crew was cursed by the sea. Others believe the ship was attacked by a storm no one could see. But the truth, it's still out there, hidden in the waves, waiting for someone brave enough to look. And now, decades later, the Marine Midland is more than a ship, it's a memory, a mystery, and a whisper in the wind. What happened to it? And why does it still call out to the sea? You know, some ships vanish like a whisper into the fog, and others leave behind a trail of unanswered questions. The SS Marine Midland was one of those ships, a proud vessel built in the 1940s, meant to carry goods across the Atlantic with ease. Its crew was made up of a mix of seasoned sailors and young recruits, all of them eager for the promise of adventure. But the ocean has a way of testing even the strongest of hearts. The ship's owner, a shipping company called Oceanic Transports, was known for their efficiency and speed. But in the late 1940s, they were also known for pushing their crews to the limit, chasing profits across the world's most treacherous waters. And then, one stormy night in the winter of 1948, the SS Marine Midland simply disappeared. No distress calls, no wreckage, just a void where a ship once sailed. The search that followed was as futile as the disappearance itself. No bodies were found, no survivors emerged from the sea, just the memory of a ship and the questions it left behind. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened to the SS Marine Midland, but the stories keep growing and the mystery only deepens with every passing year. You remember the first time you heard about the Marine Midland? It was just a story, like a ghost in the fog, no one took it seriously. But then, the whispers started. The captain said they were heading for a routine cargo drop, but the radio went silent. No distress call, no signal, just nothing. It was like the ship had blinked out of existence. People said the crew was all in their places, but no one knew what happened. Some said they were taken by the sea, others said the ship was never meant to sail that route. And then there were the whispers of the drowned. You think about the crew, their families, their lives. What would it feel like to be on that ship, knowing the sea could take you in an instant? And what would it feel like to be left behind? That's when the real fear starts. Not for the ship, but for the silence that follows. Because sometimes, the sea doesn't take you. It waits. And then it takes you in the night. You remember the moment the lights went out on that fateful night, don't you? A sudden, total darkness that swallowed the ship whole, leaving only the sound of your own breath and the hum of an unseen force. Then came the silence so deep it felt like the world had been held its breath. No crash, no scream, just the eerie absence of sound, as if the ship had been plucked from the sea and left to drift in the void. Some say the ship was pulled under by a storm, others whisper that the crew was taken by something older than the sea, something that doesn't belong to this world, and never will. But the most haunting part? No one knows for sure what happened. That's what makes it linger, isn't it? A story that's not just about the past, but the quiet fear of what might still be out there. I was told by a retired sailor, his voice trembling, that the ship's bell would ring twice in the dead of night, but never once when the crew was alive. It was a warning, he said, a whisper from the deep. Another witness, a former radio operator, swore he heard voices on the static whispers in a language no one aboard knew. They called the ship by a name that wasn't on any map. One last survivor, a cook who barely made it out, said the sea itself seemed to pull the ship under. He said the water was warm, and the sky was clear just like the day it vanished. These stories don't match the official report, but they're all we have, and somehow, they feel more real than the silence that followed. We combed through the ship's logs, and what we found was more than just a record, it was a diary of confusion. The crew didn't know where they were, and neither did the captain. They had no charts, no compass, just a sense of direction that led them straight into the unknown. Then there were the final entries. No one knew what happened next. Just a single line: "We are lost, and the sea is not what it seems." It was as if the ship had vanished without a trace, swallowed by a darkness that refused to let go. The crew's belongings were never found, and no one who was on board ever returned. Some say they were taken by the sea, others that they were never there at all. But the truth? Well, the truth is still out there, waiting to be found. And as for the ship itself, it vanished like a ghost. No wreckage, no survivors, just the feeling that it was never meant to be found. Like it was waiting for someone to finally ask the right question. You know, there's one thing about the Marine Midland that's never been explained. No one knows exactly where the ship went, not even the ones who were on it. Some say it vanished in a storm, others claim it was attacked by something no one can see. But the truth? It's like the sea swallowed the ship whole, and no one remembers what it looked like. The last known sighting was in the early hours of the morning, with the ship just a speck on the horizon. The crew never sent a distress call, and no one ever heard from them again. Now, decades later, the mystery still lingers like a whisper on the wind. And sometimes, if you listen closely, you can almost hear the ship calling out for help. You ever wonder what they saw, what they felt, and why, in the end, they never made it home? You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered what really happened to the SS Marine Midland? Some say the ship was never found, others say it was just a ghost ship, drifting through the fog like a memory we can't quite grasp. Local legends say the crew vanished without a sound, and the ship was never seen again. Some say they were taken by the sea, others say they were taken by something far worse, something that waits for the right moment to claim its own. Some believe the ship was never meant to be found, that the sea swallowed it whole, and the story was just a cover for something more complicated, a cover for the truth that's still buried in the deep. And then there are the whispers, the ones that say the ship never left port, that it was never even real, that the whole thing was just a dream, or a mistake, or a warning that the sea has its own rules. But no matter what the truth is, one thing is certain: the sea doesn't forget, and neither do those who sailed its waters or those who dared to dream they might return. And so, the mystery of the SS Marine Midland lingers, a ghost in the fog of time. No bodies, no answers, just whispers in the dark. What if the truth is out there, waiting for someone brave enough to look? The Coast Guard closed the case, but the question remains: did the ship sink, or was it taken? Some say it was a ghost ship, others say it was a cover-up. But the sea doesn't forget, and neither does the truth. Every year, on the anniversary of its disappearance, some say they hear a foghorn in the distance. It's not the Coast Guard, it's not the wind, it's the ship trying to speak, but no one is listening. Perhaps the real mystery isn't the ship, but the silence that followed. Why no bodies? Why no records? Maybe the sea took them, or maybe the truth is hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to ask the right question. And so, the SS Marine Midland disappears again into the mist just like it always has. But one day, maybe, someone will listen to the sea and finally find the truth. You know, sometimes the most haunting stories aren't the ones that end in a scream, but the ones that fade into silence. Like the SS Marine Midland, where did it go? Did it vanish, or did it just stop being heard? Maybe the sea doesn't forget. Maybe it just waits, like a mother waiting for a child who never came home. And sometimes, the waves whisper secrets only the wind can carry. And as for me, I'll be right here, beside the fire, with a cup of tea and a story that lingers long after the last word is said. So, dear listener, what will you hear next? The wind, the waves, or maybe something else entirely? You've heard of the Titanic, but have you ever heard of the Wilhelm Gustloff? It wasn't a ship that sank, but one that was sunk by the very hands of history itself. It's a name that whispers through the waves of the Baltic Sea like a ghost on the water. This was no ordinary vessel. It was a German passenger ship, a floating city of thousands, carrying more souls than any other ship in history. And yet, its story is one you've probably never heard, but you might feel it in your bones. The Wilhelm Gustloff was a ship of war, a vessel of survival, and a grave for the innocent. It's a story that doesn't just haunt the sea, it haunts the memory of those who were never allowed to remember. So, what is it about this ship that lingers in the dark? Why does it call out to us from the depths of history, whispering in a language only the lost can understand? As we set sail into the story of the Wilhelm Gustloff, you will feel the weight of its silence. It's not just a ship, it's a memory, a wound, and a warning. And it's waiting for you to listen. You know, the Wilhelm Gustloff wasn't just any ship. It was a luxury liner, a floating palace on the Baltic, built for the wealthy, not for war. But war had other plans for it. It was commissioned in the early 1930s, a time when Germany was building its empire and the world was on the edge of a dark chapter. The ship was meant to carry the elite, not soldiers. But when war broke out, the Wilhelm Gustloff became a symbol of something else entirely. It was transformed into a troop ship, packed with soldiers, families, and even civilians, all desperate to escape the chaos. The ship was never meant for this. It was built for comfort, not for the horrors of war. But now it was carrying the weight of a nation's desperation. And in the end, it became the largest maritime disaster in history, a tragedy so vast it's hard to believe it happened. But it did, and the ghosts of those lost still linger in the shadows of its decks. You know how sometimes, when you're halfway through a story, you feel that prickly little shiver in your spine, the kind that says, "Oh, this is going to get interesting." Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Well, the first signs that something was terribly wrong started with a letter, not a scream, not a ghost, just a letter that didn't belong to anyone. It was addressed to a woman who had been lost to the war, a mother who had been separated from her child during the chaos of evacuation. The letter never arrived, but it still found its way into the hands of the wrong people. And then, the first real sign came, not a scream, not a ghost, but a silence so heavy it felt like the world had forgotten to breathe. You can imagine the weight of that silence, the kind that lingers in your bones, like the echo of a voice that never came. You see it now, don't you? That moment when the world changed for those poor souls on the Wilhelm Gustloff. A calm sea, a quiet morning, and then just like that everything went dark. A ship full of people, some with children, some with luggage, all heading somewhere. But then, the radio crackles. The captain's voice is calm, but the tone is raw, like he's not telling you what's happening, but warning you. They didn't know what was coming. Some tried to reach the lifeboats, others clung to the sides, and many just disappeared, lost in the dark, swallowed by the sea, never to be found. And then silence. The sea took them all. No bodies, no survivors. Just a ship that was never meant to be there, and a story that was never meant to be told. I remember the way the sea looked that day, like a mirror, but it wasn't reflecting the sky. It was reflecting something else, something that had already been lost. One of the survivors said they saw a line of people, like a long, slow procession, walking toward the water. Not running, not screaming, just walking. A German sailor, who had been on the ship, later told me he saw the water turn black. Not from the sun, but from the weight of what was below. Some said they heard voices, not from the living, but from the dead, calling out in a language they didn't understand, but somehow they knew. And then, the silence broke. Not with a scream, but with the sound of the sea swallowing everything. We followed the trail of names, each one a whisper from the past. The files were sparse, but something about the way they were buried felt deliberate, almost protective. One file mentioned a nurse who had vanished during the evacuation. Her name was crossed out, as if someone had tried to erase her from history. It was like she had never existed. Then there were the letters. Some were postmarked days after the ship was last seen, written in a trembling hand, begging for help. They never made it to their intended recipients. We found a survivor, a man who claimed he had seen a child floating in the water just before the ship disappeared. He was too old to remember the names, but he remembered the sound of the child's voice. There were no bodies, no wreckage, no final words, only the echoes of lives cut short and the silence that followed. It was as if the ship had never existed at all. You ever wonder what one small clue could change everything? What if there was something so simple, so overlooked, that it could rewrite the entire story of that night? A single name, scrawled in the margin of a report, or a missing piece of a uniform, or even a pocket watch that never made it back to its owner. These are the things that linger, unanswered, in the dark. What if the truth wasn't in the war records, but in the silence of a forgotten pocket? What if the one detail that has never been explained is the only thing that could bring them home? We can't solve the past, but we can remember it. And sometimes, the answer is just waiting to be found in the quiet places where the light doesn't reach. You ever hear the old tale about the ghost ship that never made it home? It's said to sail the Baltic on stormy nights, its white sails tattered, its crew silent as the sea. Some say it's the Wilhelm Gustloff, but others insist it's something older, something that never should have been built. In some parts of Poland, they still tell the story of the ship that came for the living and took the dead with it. They say it's not just the victims who are lost, but the memories of the ones who stayed behind. There's a theory, whispered in the quiet of bar rooms and family gatherings, that the Wilhelm Gustloff wasn't just a casualty of war, it was a warning, a lesson in what happens when history is buried and the dead are forgotten. Some say the ship's ghost still sails the Baltic, carrying with it the last cries of those who perished. Others say it's a metaphor, a reminder that the past is never truly gone. You decide which one you believe. You know, sometimes the most haunting stories are the ones we can't quite solve. And the Wilhelm Gustloff? It's one of those. A ship that took so many lives, yet left so few answers. Every year, people return to the same questions. Where are the bodies? Why were so many lost? And who, if anyone, was to blame? It's like the sea itself is holding its breath. And yet, the truth remains just out of reach, like the ship itself gone, but never truly gone. Some say the sea remembers, and some say it's waiting for the right person to ask the right question. So what will you do, dear listener? Will you follow the trail of whispers, or let the past remain just that past? The sea has more to say if you're brave enough to listen. You know, sometimes the most haunting places aren't the ones you expect. They're the ones you walk by every day, and suddenly, you hear the whispers of the lost. The Wilhelm Gustloff isn't just a ship, it's a ghost of history, a wound that never healed. And the people who sailed on it? They're still out there, somewhere, waiting to be remembered. We tell these stories not to scare you, but to honor the ones who were never given a chance to be heard. And maybe remind you that history doesn't forget, even when we do. But before we go on, let me ask you, what do you think happens to the people who vanish into the sea? Are they lost, or are they still here, waiting for someone to listen? Stay with me, and we'll go deeper into the dark together. But first, let's take a moment to breathe and remember that even in the silence, there is still a story waiting to be told. You've heard of castles, you've heard of mansions, but what about a place that feels like it was built by the devil himself? Welcome to the Priory of Saint Foy, where the air is thick with secrets and the silence is louder than any scream. Built in the 12th century, this place was once a beacon of faith, a place where monks and pilgrims came to pray. But now, it's a tomb of forgotten prayers and whispered curses. Stories tell of monks who vanished without a trace, of children who cried out in the night, and of a young girl who was never found after she disappeared from the chapel. To this day, the locals still tell tales of the priory. They say the wind howls like a banshee, the stones groan like the dying, and the silence is so thick, you can taste it. So, what do you think? Is it the place that's cursed, or is it the people who keep returning, drawn by something they can't explain? You ever wonder how a place like this, quiet, old, and full of secrets, could have started? Well, the Priory of Saint Foy was founded in the 12th century, a time when faith and fear walked hand in hand. It was built by a noble family, the de Montforts, who saw the land as a gift from God and a way to claim power. But power, they learned, comes with a price. Monks, scholars, and even outcasts found shelter there, but not everyone left with their soul intact. Some say the priory was built on land that once belonged to a pagan cult. The de Montforts brought their wealth and influence, but also their bloodlines and their secrets. Some of those secrets were never meant to be uncovered. And so, the priory became more than a church, it became a place where the past refused to stay buried. A place where the echoes of the dead still walk the halls. You remember how the air felt that night, thick with the scent of damp earth and the promise of something ancient stirring beneath the surface. The wind had a way of carrying whispers, and I swear I heard the trees murmur in a language I didn't understand. The first sign wasn't a scream or a shadow, it was the silence. Like the world had forgotten to breathe, and the only sound was the creak of the old gate, as if the place itself was holding its breath. The next day, the villagers spoke in hushed tones about the old stones and the things that go bump in the night. They said the place had a memory, and that memory was not kind. And then there was the smell like old books, damp wood, and something sweet and wrong, like the memory of a long-dead perfume that shouldn't exist anymore. It was then that I realized we were not just visiting a place, we were walking into the echo of a past that had never truly left. You remember the night the bells stopped ringing and the silence cut through the village like a blade. It wasn't just the silence, it was the way the wind held its breath, as if waiting for something to happen. The last bell had rung at midnight, but no one heard it. Some said the wind had carried it away, others claimed it was the sound of the abbess's final prayer. Whatever the truth, the villagers never heard a sound that night. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40-ounce tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. No one could explain how she died, and no one could say what she had seen. The villagers whispered that she had been taken by the spirit of the priory, that she had tried to stop the curse, but the curse had found her first. To this day, the bells still don't ring at midnight. Some say they're waiting for her to return, or for the curse to be broken. But if they ever do ring again, it won't be a sound, it'll be a warning. I've spoken to dozens of people who claim to have seen the priory's ghost, but one story stands out. A woman in her 70s told me she saw a woman in a 17th century gown, standing at the entrance, staring directly at her with eyes that seemed to follow. She said she tried to run, but the woman just smiled and vanished into the mist. No one else saw her, just her. And her eyes, they never left her. He said it was the only time he ever heard a child laugh in that place. And when he left, the sound stopped. He never told anyone. He said it felt like the walls were watching him. And then there's the gardener who swore he saw a shadow moving in the cloisters at night. He said it wasn't just a trick of the light. It moved like it had a purpose, like it was waiting for someone. He never told the others. He said it was too real, too close, and the shadow had always seemed to be looking for someone, just like the woman at the gate. Like the priory was still waiting. We started with the old records, you know, the ones that smell like dust and memory. The first thing we found was a list of names that didn't match the official archives, names that had been erased from history like a ghost in the attic. Some of these names were of monks, others of nuns, and a few weren't. The names of people who vanished without a trace, their fates left to the silence of the stones. It was like the priory had swallowed them whole. We followed the trail of these missing names to the edge of the woods, where the trees grew so thick they seemed to close in around us. It was then we found the first clue, a stone circle half buried, with markings that looked like a forgotten language. The markings weren't just decorative, they told a story of betrayal, of a secret buried deeper than the earth. We realized the priory had been a place of both prayer and peril, with a line between the sacred and the sinister blurred like a shadow at dusk. As we pieced together the fragments of the past, one thing became clear: the priory wasn't just haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by the echoes of its own sins, and the weight of those sins still pressed down on the land like a heavy, unspoken curse. You know, the one thing that's always bugged me about the priory is this little detail that never gets explained. You ever wonder what exactly happened to the last priest who walked those stone halls? No one seems to know if he left of his own accord or if he was taken. Some say he was excommunicated, others say he vanished after a confrontation with the abbess. But the records? They're all blank, like he never existed. And yet, every time we've tried to dig deeper, the archives just stop. No records, no names, no traces of him at all. It's like he was erased from history, as if he never stood in that place, never spoke those words, never prayed those prayers. So here's the thing: maybe the real curse isn't the ghosts or the bloodstains. Maybe it's the silence, the way the past refuses to speak, and the present is left to wonder what really happened to him. You've heard the whispers, but have you ever asked why the name Saint Foy lingers like a half-remembered dream? Some say it's a prayer, others a curse, but I've always wondered if the real story lies in the silence between the words. The locals still talk about the girl who vanished in the 1700s. Her name's been lost, but her fate hasn't. Some claim she was a nun, others say she was a lover, and a few still swear she's been seen in the gardens, wearing the same blue dress she vanished in. There's a theory, though, that the priory wasn't just a place of worship, but of something darker. Some say the nuns didn't vanish, they were silenced. Others say the priory was built on a site where something older, something hungry, already waited. And now, as the years pass, the stories shift. Some say the priory is a place of peace, others say it's a warning, but no one says for sure what the true legacy of Saint Foy is. because sometimes the truth is too heavy to carry. You know, the real mystery isn't just the ghost, it's the silence. No one can say for sure what happened in that chapel, or why the nuns left in the dead of night. It's like the air itself holds its breath. The records were burned, the ledgers vanished, and the last surviving nun died in her sleep, whispering a name no one remembers. Some say she was trying to warn us. Others say she was just dreaming. And now, even the local historians are quiet. They don't talk about it. They just look away, like the past is too heavy, too dangerous to carry. So, what do you think? Was it a curse? A cover-up? Or maybe something even older? Something the nuns never meant to awaken? Whatever it is, it's still here, waiting, watching, and it won't let go. You know, sometimes the most terrifying things aren't the screams or the shadows, but the silence that follows, a silence so thick it feels like the walls are holding their breath. And sometimes the stories we carry with us are the ones that linger longest, like a whisper in the dark that won't let go. So as we turn the page, remember, some stories don't end. They just wait in the quiet spaces between breaths. And perhaps, just perhaps, the next tale will be the one that finally answers the question you've been carrying. You've heard of the sea, but have you heard of the sea's secrets? The SS Valentia wasn't just a ship, it was a tomb on waves, a place where the ocean claimed more than it gave. The Valentia was built for speed, not for the deep. In 1948, it set off with a full load of cargo, but the sea had other plans. The storm came like a beast, and the ship didn't stand a chance. What happened next is a tale whispered in ports and told in hushed tones. The Valentia didn't sink quietly, it vanished, and the ocean swallowed its secrets whole. Now, decades later, the Valentia's ghost is said to drift in the same waters, still chasing the storm that took it. Some say it's a warning, others say it's a lullaby for the lost. You see, the Valentia wasn't just any ship. It was a British luxury liner, sleek and proud, built in 1921 for the White Star Line. It was meant to carry the wealthy across the Atlantic, but fate had other plans. Its captain, Captain Henry H. Bell, was a man of experience, but even he couldn't have predicted the storm that would come. The night of the tragedy, the sea turned against them with a fury few had ever seen. The final moments are still debated. Some say the ship broke in two, others say it was swallowed whole. What is certain is that fewer than 200 of the 3,000 passengers made it to safety. In the years that followed, the Valentia became a symbol of both the dangers of the sea and the fragility of life. Its story lives on in the whispers of sailors and the stories passed down through generations. You know, sometimes the worst things start with a quiet, almost laughable mistake, like when the ship's carpenter said, "We're just a little off course," and no one believed him. But you can imagine the way the waves looked that day, too calm, too still, like the sea was holding its breath. Then came the first real sign. The cook in the galley swore he heard a child's laugh echoing through the corridors. He turned and the hall was empty. You can picture him standing there, hands trembling, looking at the wall where the sound had come from, like it was watching him back. Then there was the radio. They had a signal, but it wasn't coming from anywhere. It was just a faint, repeating voice, saying things like, "Let me out," or "I'm not supposed to be here." No one could tell if it was the wind, the static, or something else entirely. And then, of course, the lights went out. Not just once, but several times. And each time, the crew said they saw something, just a shadow, a shape, a flicker of movement in the dark. You can imagine the way the air felt in those moments. Thick and heavy, like the ship itself was holding its breath. You see it now, the ship's bell still hanging in the air, its bronze surface dulled by time, the sound of its toll echoing in the silence of the port. The Valentia was never meant to sink, but on that fateful night, the sea rose like a ghost, swallowing the ship whole in a moment of pure, silent terror. The crew, the passengers, the children, they were all gone, vanished as if the sea had reached out and pulled them into its endless, whispering dark. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. And to this day, the sea still remembers them, the waves still whispering their names, and the wind still carrying their final, unanswered cries. Before you go, if you enjoyed this, please give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell us in the comments what you'd like us to make next. We read every single one. Thank you so much for watching.